Shooby-dooby-doo, let's do this. You all ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to be looking at your artwork. And you guys have been busy, busier than ever before, which is a great thing. I woke up and started working on this at 8 o'clock this morning, about, 5 hours ago, and figured, oh, plenty of time to get ready for today's show. At about 11 o'clock, I am about a quarter done getting ready for this show. So then I kind of bumped this episode till 2 o'clock, and then as it was like, oh, I'm still working frantically. So I think I'm ready to get going here, and wow, I'm very, very impressed. And I'm also, again, I just want to say right off the top, incredibly honored, and I at a loss for words to describe how touching it is that there's so many people, the vast majority of whom I've never met before, who have been engaging with these episodes, painting some of the works that I've been doing, as well as so many of the other works that you've been creating yourself and sharing them with us. It just blows my mind. So let's get started here. Let's start taking a look at what you've been up to, right? I get to get out of my painting clothes for a little bit of time and take a look and celebrate your artwork. So maybe just before we do that, if you're new to the channel, you're watching for the first time, remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, especially for days like this when the time gets pushed back. You'll be able to know when those are actually happening. And if you find it at all interesting, you find my feedback interesting, you find the artwork of other people inspiring, consider leaving a donation. I've already seen a few people today that have done that. You can use the PayPal link in the description below. There's the YouTube super chat function, which is, if you see a little dollar sign by the bottom, you can leave a dollar there. And then if you want to contact me through the Facebook group, etc., there's lots of different ways to go about that. So I want to start off a couple things, just sharing some of the great artwork that I think is just really inspiring here. This is a painting that Charmaine did. I think she did this maybe a few months ago. And this is a cashier that was working at a local grocery store, and took a photograph of her and made a painting of her, and then decided to give this painting to the woman in question here. And I just think it's such a beautiful gesture. This is her with the painting, and what a surprise, what an incredible gift. And I love this whole idea of making artwork, maybe even a portrait of a friend or family member, a co-worker, or in this case a stranger, and giving it to them as a show of appreciation. And I mean, we've seen these things where people pretend to do a drawing of someone on the subway, and then they actually go back home and work on it for hours and hours and hours, make a plan and meet up with somebody later and give it to them. But this woman had no idea that Charmaine was spending all this time creating this painting. I think it's super touching, and just a good reminder of the potential for change and spreading love and community through art, right? That is the power of art to really change the world. So thank you, Charmaine, for leading the way here. I thought I'd share just another image here. Obviously, Ukraine is in people's minds lately. We did do a whole series, and there's a few more artists as part of our series looking at great Ukrainian artists throughout history. We'll continue that, but one of the big symbols of Ukraine, the national flower, is the sunflower against a nice big bright blue sky. And so I just want to kind of mention this here, and then just something not quite related, but here's an artwork that Maria did as a donation for a fundraiser for healthcare. for people that lack healthcare. And I just thought it was kind of a really cool, not only is I love this picture, but I love the spirit in which it was created. Again, creating something that we can give to help raise money for a cause that we believe in. I think this is a cause that is pretty. I don't think there's too many people that would not believe in this particular cause. But that is really cool. Very simple little artwork. She said, I made it in a hurry with limited tools. I described it as a shattered flag full of blank spaces in which the viewer can fill in themselves into those empty spaces. That's great. Love it. Okay, so there is, as you may be, I think we have almost 300 artworks that you guys made on your own outside of class. And so we'll get to all of those shortly, but what I want to do is I want to start, as always, each one of these episodes by looking at some of the artwork that we have done in class, and then we'll come back and look at all of the great work that you guys have done afterwards here. So the first on our list here is picking up where we left off on, was this New Year's Eve that we did this painting? New Year's Eve or New Year's Day? I can't remember. Just a few months ago, we were looking at the great romantic painter Caspar David Friedrich, and Friedrich's painting Wander Above the Sea of Clouds, I think it was called. One of my favorite paintings, one of my favorite artists, obviously. But we'll look here, Gemini's version of this painting, Maria's version of this painting, and Paula's version of the painting. One other thing I just always love is how each one of these paintings is different approach to the same painting, get different results. Here, Paula's got a very, actually quite colorful painting of, we see lots of greens in here, versus, let's say, Maria's, which has a much colder feeling to it. And I think maybe this is a little bit in between Gemini's and Maria's here. So with the same image, we can, by even just tweaking the colors a little bit, we can change the mood, the feelings that are evoked in a painting, which I think as you get to know how to mix your own colors and you get over some of the initial hurdles of painting, you can start being more specific and really deliberate about your choices. And I think that's where painting starts to get really exciting, right? I think that obviously when you're getting started, it's a little bit overwhelming, right? And that's why we have all those kind of more basic paintings. But then you get going, you start like, what could I do or say with this painting? Because you can take any one of the ones we've been doing in class, and then we'll see towards the how people can tweak those paintings and make them even more personal. I don't know if I have many comments on these. This was one of my favorite paintings that I did, that I felt really I hit it out of the park. So I was really satisfied with the way that turned out. Not all of them, I'd say my batting average is sort of maybe 60-70% during the in-class episodes. So there's usually about 30% of the paintings are like, there's a few things I would do differently, which is, I think, a good thing for people to know, that I don't always feel 100% satisfied with every painting that I make. And I don't think there's any artist who's ever lived who feels 100% satisfied with all the artworks they've made. So, but this was one that I did feel happy with, right? So these are all great. I mean, one of the things I would say, Gemini, is this figure looks a little bit short. Maybe that leg could just be a little bit longer. Obviously, his leg is a little bit bent up here, but I mean, I think this is also a challenging one as well, right? So let's move on. Let's look at Thomas Gainsborough's Blue Boy. And we did this one, not only, obviously, this is one of history's most famous paintings, but I wanted to do this painting because this artwork is currently on exhibit in England, where it was originally created for the first time in, I think, like 80 years or something. Anyway, so, and as I probably mentioned when we were talking about this episode, I'll just flip through while I'm talking, that this painting not only was the most expensive painting for many, many years when it was originally purchased by Henry Huntington, and then brought to Los Angeles, which was a scandal at the time and led to laws in England to prevent what they call national treasures from leaving the country. But this painting was arguably, before the Mona Lisa, the most famous painting in the world, mostly because of its exorbitant cost at the time. Now I think anyone would die to be able to buy a painting like this for that price. I think it essentially was maybe 100, 200,000, I think, for that painting when it was in today's dollars, when it was purchased. But that back then was, you know, it would have been maybe $5,000 or $6,000, but it was still way more than anyone had ever spent. So maybe actually let's just start back down here. We'll look at Richard's version of this painting. I think this turned out really nice. I think especially the fabric, Richard, I think is exceptionally done. One thing I think could be lacking here is maybe a bit of a shadow by these feet, because it's not clear that this person is kind of, you know, like almost like floating in space, right? So a bit of a shadow somewhere, probably going towards in this direction because the light is hitting from the other, or this side. So the light is coming from this side, so the shadow would be down here, which I think we do have. Obviously it's darker down here, but we still want to have something. It's going to be probably darkest right next to the foot, right where the shadow attaches. The face is also a little bit different, which doesn't bother me at all. Although we could maybe, I mean, I guess it's stylistic, so it's up to you, but I would maybe think about defining the nostrils a little bit more, and maybe that ear could be a little bit darker. Again, always nitpicking. I'm not that I always say, like, I try to appreciate these artworks as they are, as if they were done exactly as intended. But as a teacher, I'm always thinking, like, oh, if maybe they do want a little bit of suggestions, this is what I would suggest. Okay, here's Paula's version. This turned out great, Paula. And I would just use the same thing I just said to Richard, is maybe just a little bit of darkness, a little bit of shadow on this side, especially where the feet attach to the ground. The feet attach to the ground, where the feet are touching the ground. And also, I like the little the smile in this painting. That's a nice little touch too. That's great. It's also a little bit brighter. We talked about this painting, how it was probably a little bit darker because of the varnish. I don't think it's quite as dark as, let's say, even here's Holly's version of the painting, which is, I think, quite accurate to the way the painting looks today. And I think she's done an exceptional job here. And we can even see it's a little bit darker by the feet, which helps. I might even push that a little bit more, but who knows? She says it took 35 hours. Never thought I would do this painting, but I'm glad I did. The bourgeois brat, as she calls it. That's great. And I think we talked about this because Holly was using a Q-tip and hand sanitizer to dissolve some of the acrylic paint away, which obviously was working really well for her. I think episodes ago I kind of expressed a little bit of skepticism about using that particular technique on the long term. Not necessarily just because of the archival properties of when we add something external, foreign to the paint material, in this case probably an alcohol-based sanitizer, and that it might add something that could then slowly eat away at the rest of the paint, or prevent the paint that you're going to paint in here to adhere properly to that surface. I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but I would just be mindful of that. And I think afterwards Holly was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to do that anymore. But it is a very clever solution. I'd never heard of that before. Here's Heidi's version. Wow, much more, I guess, expressive brush strokes here than, let's say, even just the way Holly had done hers. That is cool. Like, again, totally different painting. So this almost sort of prefigures where art was going at the time that Gainsborough made his painting. Yeah, I mean, now that I see there's so few people did any kind of shadows down by the feet, I start wondering, did I do that, or did Gainsborough kind of leave a little bit of that out of his own painting? It's entirely possible, right? Wow, that's cool. I mean, some people love this particular this kind of style because it's, you know, it reminds us a lot more of Impressionism. Gainsborough himself would have been probably like, well, this is not how to paint, but he lived like 100 years before Impressionism took off, right? So maybe not. I'll have to think about he died in the mid 1800s, so kind of just shortly before Impressionism began. But he did have a bit more of an expressive brushstroke, not quite as much as that. But again, I'm not saying that you have to do anything. I'm just saying if we look at the painting itself. Here's Gail's version of the painting. I think this looks great, Gail. I would probably think about pushing your contrasts a little bit more. I think what this painting needs is a little bit of darker blues in the darker shadowy areas, and maybe even, let's say, on the hands, because we've got this really, I like the way that you've done the face. There's a kind of it reminds me a little bit of, oh my goodness, what's her name? Just totally escapes my mind. Anyway, but I think if we just put a little bit of darker, not necessarily an outline, I wouldn't use like a Posca pen, but just a little, you could just glaze with it a little bit of a darker color. I think that would give your painting more dimension. And I think when we talked about like values are the contrast between light and dark. That is usually one of the things most artists struggle with the most, whether it's drawing or painting, is that a lot of artists have all the values in an actually fairly narrow range and don't push the highlights or the darker areas, because those actually give you more range to express yourself. So that might be something just to take a look at. So kind of a little bit like what Eleanor's done here, kind of pushed those contrasts even higher, and we can see how it defines the figure even more. Very cool. I'm not sure there's anything more I can say that I haven't said previously. That's great. Again, all these faces, look, there's different expressions and everything. Wow, Deborah, that is cool. Okay, so this actually is maybe the most similar to Gainsborough's style, because Gainsborough's style is quite expressive for the time within that academic tradition, but still a little bit rigid. You've gone maybe a little bit further towards Impressionism, but you still have that spirit of Gainsborough in here. And of course I love the fur babies that you added, as you say, here to the bottom to give it a little twist. That is cool. I love customizing these paintings. That's awesome. So I don't I don't know if I have anything extra to add here, but all of these, if we just kind of spin through them again really quickly, are so cool, so different. Wow. Great job, you guys. Wow. Huh. You know what, this, maybe it's Alexander Colville that reminds me of. He painted faces like that. Alexander Colville being a famous Canadian painter. Okay, let's continue motoring forward here. Let's look at the art that we did inspired by Roy Lichtenstein. Lichtenstein. I think it's Lichtenstein. Roy Lichtenstein. Okay, so let's go through these. We got Deborah's, Gail's, Gemini. Oh, and it looks like Gemini painted over that. Craig, Maria, Paula, Sandra, and Sandra here. How about we'll just go through these again? I always just sort of like seeing them all together, like a animated. So what? Let's maybe start here with Sandra's. Now this one was a little bit different than anything we had done before, because we were trying to. Roy Lichtenstein is a very famous pop artist, and one of the things he's most famous for is replicating that Ben-Day dot quality. The Ben-Day dots are the print press's way of mimicking color. That kind of print press isn't really used that anymore. Things are digitally printed now, and they're able to get much more higher resolution. But it is so we tried to replicate his Ben-Day dot use in these paintings, which is tricky, doing all those little dots. But it is interesting at how similar it is to Yayoi Kusama, the probably the greatest living artist, Japanese artist, and how that she uses those dots in a very, very different way, of course. But it's, also kind of harkens to pointillism as well. So, the other we could talk about just how expressive do we want to be with those dots, because there is the potential. It's hard to get those dots all straight and to get them in that seamless pattern, and potentially you could really play with this and do something even more expressive. Instead of trying to, if you don't like that rigid dotting, you could be a little bit more wild and create patterns with it, other types of patterns. Very cool. I like the modulation of the of this color, this little bit more of a Caucasian skin tone here with the dots over top of it. I think I just kept painting on my, or I guess I was the background. Did we make a, I'm trying to remember how I did this. I think I just used the same background for everything and then used the red dots to create that flesh tone, as he would have as well. But that turned out pretty cool. Here's Paula's version of it. All those little dots. I could see that just driving people mad. It looks like Paula did some in the hair, like, oh, I don't need them there, so tried to erase. The easiest thing for that kind of thing is just to paint white right over top of it, let it dry, and then replicate whatever techniques you used up until that point to get rid of that kind of thing. Because trying to paint yellow to hide something, you're going to need buckets and buckets of yellow, because yellow is very transparent, right? Wow, here's Maria's version. That's cool. Huh. You know what's also interesting is it looks like a few people here did not use the template, which is one of the things that Roy Lichtenstein did not do. A lot of his figures, although they're based on comics, they're distorted in some way as he was enlarging them onto canvases. I'm not exactly sure how he got them onto canvas, whether he used a grid or just eyeballed it, but I think it gives his paintings a bit of a quirky nature. Greg says, Rachel's on the right, mine's on the left. This does look like both using the template. I love how there's two very different versions here. It looks like Greg might have painted over the dots. It looks like a few people did that. They're like, this is not working, I'm going to get rid of them. But it's cool, like, let's say in Rachel's here, almost these dots almost kind of start to form like tears running down her eyes, right? But even then, you know, if you paint over it, all those little dots, you're going to get like the little bit, the texture that is being created by those dots. And you can, some people might really like that texture, right? So that's presents the possibility of using texture in a way to create really unique surfaces that you may want to think of exploring in the past. It doesn't have to be dots, it could be lines or other images potentially, right? Like something surfacing underneath the canvas. Here's, so I think this is Gemini's first attempt, and then this is after everything is painted, right? So we see all these little dots underneath here. I don't know, which one do I like better? I could see why Gemini might think this might be some sort of rash taking over her face and wanting to get rid of it. We still see some of that texture coming through here, which may look like she's got acne or something a little bit, right? I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I would almost be inclined to go over top of these and turn them into freckles or something. You know, where you particularly see the texture. That I just as a thought. Again, I don't mind this painting like that either, but I could see why someone might feel frustrated by that. And then we have this one here by Gail. Wow. I mean, I do really appreciate all of the work you guys put into these paintings. It does seem like this painting must have caused a few people a little bit of frustration. It is a little bit time-consuming for sure. Interesting placement of your signature right there in the palm. It sort of looks a little bit like almost a tattoo, or the wrinkles, you know, in her palm. Yeah, I don't know. That's always a big discussion with artists as to, do you sign the canvas or not? I think you should definitely sign the back of your paintings, no question, all the time. That is absolutely necessary. Whether you sign the front or not is a whole other question. And then where do you sign it? What color do you use? That's always kind of we could do a whole hour-long episode talking about that and looking at different images and how different artists have approached that. And wow, one more, Deborah. Connect the dots. Looks like she's got measles. Richard told me to keep all the dots straight. That's funny. But you know, this kind of does have a Yayoi Kusama quality, right? If those lines start getting, instead of going straight, we start allowing them to get pretty funky. You could really create something pretty wild and unique here. I just see in the comments there, going back, Deborah says, Holly, you led me to cleaning of old brushes with hand sanitizer. Thank you. Holly says my chat keeps freezing. I'm not sure what's happening there. Greg says, yes, I did paint over the dots. Okay, so let's. These are great. Again, I'm so impressed that everyone took on that challenge. That was not an easy painting for sure. Let's move on here. Let's look at the work of Leonardo da Vinci, the great high Renaissance master here. This was also a deceptively tricky painting to do because it looks like there's not a lot to it because there's not that many lines on this painting or brush strokes, but the mastery of Leonardo shows through, and you feel it when you try to make this painting. You're like, wow, this guy really knew what he was doing, because this is tricky. And you know, I always use cooking metaphors, but it's like one of those things where you see someone on, I don't know, Gordon Ramsay cook an egg, and you're like, or you go to a good restaurant and they make eggs, and you're like, how come this egg tastes so much better here than at home? As my wife would say, it's just because somebody else made it for you. That's why it tastes so much better. Anyway, let's go through these here. Here's Paula's, Maria's, Heather's, Heidi's, Gail's, and Deborah's. Wow. All, again, very different, which is what I love. I think it would look really weird if they were all exactly the same. That would be kind of depressing. It certainly would make this type of thing for me very boring. I love seeing everyone's own little style percolating through all of these great artworks that we're recreating. And rather than getting depressed or sad or frustrated that yours doesn't look like the original or doesn't look like mine, because mine differs always from the originals as well. That should go without saying. That I think as we make these paintings, I'm hoping that there's certain paintings that start to seem more that sort of feel like they're more in your wheelhouse than others. That you're just like, yeah, some of these I've done those and I just don't feel good about it, but these ones I can pull those off and they make me feel good about myself. I'm building confidence. I'm having fun. Then really start to look at those artists' work more and do more of those types of works outside of class as well. And if there's works, it's obviously it's great to challenge yourself by looking at different artists and trying different artists, as I'm doing. But there's nothing wrong with zeroing in on an area that you feel passionate about, and that's what I would want you to do, right? So here's Deborah's again. We'll start here. This is cool. One thing I would say is maybe it looks like there's almost a little bit too much white in here, especially in the hair. I mean, that's the subtlety of Leonardo, is the almost infinitesimal use of a little bit of pigment here and there. So that you can see in a painting like this how adding white to a color gives it a bit of like that kind of chalky quality, and it increases the opacity, even just a little bit of it, and sort of starts to block out the yellows and browns that are below. But I also appreciate the subtlety that you've got here with some browns and greens and purples. Lots of different colors in here. Even on these lips. Like, that's a bit of a bold decision to use green for those lips. And even the little necklace. I don't think that was in the original, but that's also pretty cool. So this is your daughter-in-law. I love how you decided to replace this face. That's cool. I didn't even realize that until just now. No wonder. Really beautiful. And Gail here says, I find glazing such a challenge. I really prefer shading with wet paint or washes or dry brushing. And that's a great thing to recognize, right? If as you're painting you realize like, this glazing stuff is like, I'm not into it. Versus other techniques, painting wet on wet, which is a little bit trickier to do with acrylic paints. I mean, that's basically how most people paint with oil paints, because wet on wet means you're painting wet paint into other wet paint. And as you know, with acrylic paints, acrylics dry so fast that unless you're really, really fast or you're using thick areas of paint, by the time you start painting on an area, it's often dry. So you're painting wet on dry paint, which is one of the reasons glazing can be really helpful, is because we can get kind of a blending effect that is similar to acrylic or to oil paints after something is already dried, right? But again, that's a great thing to realize. Now, it might be worth challenging yourself, continue to challenge yourself with glazing fluid and see how that works. But by all means, as you can see throughout history, there are hundreds and hundreds of household name artists that want nothing to do with glazing fluid. They're like, I have never touched that stuff. I don't want to touch that stuff, and I'm the most famous artist in the world. So, whatever, right? So there's nothing wrong with that, but it is like a foundational technique, and knowing, I think we want to be able to. We don't want technique to limit us. So what's, I think, satisfying for me, even as I do these classes and investigate different artists' work, is there's definitely some things that are outside of my comfort zone. And then I try doing it a number of times with the different artists, and I get better and better at it. And some of those techniques are no longer as terrifying or frustrating, and I start feeling more confidence using them. And I feel like, you know what? Maybe in my own artwork, this thing that I was like, oh, well, I'm not going to do that, and I'll tell myself I don't like it, but it's really because I'm not good at it or I'm afraid of it. And then once you start feeling more comfortable, like, maybe I could bring that into my painting. That would be cool. Anyway, here's Heidi's version of this. Awesome. Again, it does look like almost a little bit more white than we need in the face, but because it's nice to see some of that yellow and brown coming through, but I don't mind. It's but just something just to be mindful. Like it's really hard to get painting to be that subtle, because it can be very frustrating because it's time consuming. It requires a lot of patience and often, and that's one of the reasons that so-called modern and contemporary artists use those techniques less and less and less, to the point where today glazing is relatively uncommon, right? It's generally associated with academic painting traditions of the past, but I think it's, illustrators, for instance, a lot of them continue to use glazing techniques, although a lot of them will use different paint entirely, like gouache, just because you can get really fine nuance. Now, a lot of illustrators use tablets, etc., but let's move on. Wow. Heather says, this is my first Markowsky tutorial, but I've been painting for a few years. I really enjoyed this challenge in learning glazing techniques. That is awesome. You should feel really happy with this, Heather. That looks great. I like, just like I was saying, it looks like there's maybe a lot of white in your glaze. That's okay, because I think we could get even more subtle. But the way that you've done this, especially giving the outer edges a little bit of a vignette, that kind of darker, especially toward, it looks like that. Maybe that's just the lighting here. But there's kind of almost like a swirl that you've got going around. Somehow that seems to work really well. More than anyone else's, this, I get this swirling quality, which is a really nice innovation on that painting. Really cool. Wow, Maria. I don't know how to change her alien eyes. Interesting. Alien eyes. I wonder if that's maybe it's because they're just all black inside here. We don't see the pupil or iris in there. Maybe is that what you would, I don't, like, I think if maybe even if we just darkened in here, like, you could try lightening up a little bit of the white of her eyes a little bit. Again, very, very subtle glaze, but maybe even just darkening, pushing that value might help. I mean, I don't mind it. I mean, this could very well have been something that came out of the studio of Amedeo Modigliani, the famous artist who often left the eyes blank in his paintings. And we're doing a couple of Modigliani paintings, I think, next month. I think it's in June or July. We're looking at a number of his paintings, because some of his paintings are the most expensive ever sold. So we're continuing to look at that series of artworks. I don't mind that. I really don't. There's really nice blending that I think should be noted on the cheeks and jaw and chin. Like, I think that's all stuff that should be, maybe that should be where you're focusing your attention on this painting, because I think you really succeeded in that area. And I don't know if the eyes, if that's an issue in any way, really. You may want to consider darkening the hair. I mean, sometimes it's one of those things is we're fixated on what we think is a problem when that is actually not a problem at all. It's something else that's surrounding it. So I think maybe darkening in here might help, because your face is got there's a lot of white in there, and it's pretty opaque. So a good contrast to that white is your darker color. And I think that might solve some of those issues, because I think that might be your solution. Wow, Paula, that is great. Again, as always, Paula, you never use the template, so you're just always drawing these by eye, and that is spectacular. An argument could be made this is one of the best things that I've seen you do in class. Obviously, you've done a lot of other great stuff outside of class, but that is particularly effective. Now, this is an instance where there's a lot of white in here, and I've said maybe some other people have used too much. Here, I don't know if it's quite an issue, because you've used this much that your background isn't brown, right? You've got this yellow background, so white and yellow in terms of value are pretty similar, right? They're not as high of a contrast versus, let's say here we've got this kind of darker brown, and the white, that darker brown is much lower in terms of value. So there's a high contrast, right? They're very different. Whereas this one much less so. So it's not maybe as noticeable, right? Our eyes are trained to see contrast and make those distinctions. Wow. Lots of comments in the chat here. Maria says, oh, I changed her as it was in the comment section of this post. I noticed that often I see different images in the comments, so I'm trying to capture all those, but I know that there's going to be many that I miss, because sometimes there's 10 different comments, and I try to follow all of them and capture them all together. So, but I apologize for that. Deborah says, Michael, I have discovered that with glazing we have more control with transparency. I really need to work on that. Yeah, that's the thing with glazing that is what makes it so special, is the ability to get almost invisible layers of paint that have like a 1% difference of value or color, which sounds like, what, 1%? But it's the careful layering of those layers that Leonardo mastered most famously in the Mona Lisa. Like, I don't know how many glazing layers there are, but it wouldn't surprise me if in, let's say, just one spot, let's say the famous smile, there could be easily 50 to 100 different layers of glaze, which is like, sounds wild, but that's how you create the most famous painting in human history, right? So yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but and Leonardo is rumored to have worked on that painting for 16 years. Again, not every day he was painting on it, but it is the results speak for itself, right? Okay, we're gonna move on here to Kandinsky, and I just got to plug this camera in. A battery is screaming at me, so I'm just going to do that real quick. Okay, I think I got the right one plugged in. Okay, so let's move on here. We'll talk about Wassily Kandinsky, the great Russian painter. And let's look, we did a few paintings of his. Let's look at this a little bit more advanced painting that we did. And then there was the little bit more simple painting that we also did before that. So how about let's start here with this one we did on our Tuesday, a little bit simpler series. Here's Susan's version of it. I suspect, actually I was gonna say maybe the lighting is a little bit, it looks a little bit blue in this lighting. Some of these colors seem a little bit more blue than I think they actually are in person. But essentially that's kind of irrelevant for our discussion, right? Just how it was painted. I really enjoyed this painting, right? And I probably overcomplicated it on camera, as I might tend to do sometimes. But this is, I think, working on abstract paintings when you're learning to paint is a great way of, because the allowance for mistakes is greater, right? Because let's say you paint this green instead of purple, or you paint this red instead of purple, and so on and so forth. Are people going to look at it and be like, well, no, it doesn't work. No, that obviously was purple, and you put a green in there. No, the whole thing fell apart. No one's going to know, right? So you have a lot more freedom to be a little bit more expressive, to make so-called mistakes. Whereas if you did that same sort of thing painting someone's face, and you just painted something completely far out, a purple eyebrow and a orange lips, people are like, whoa, that's weird. What? I mean, that's very expressive, but it's certainly not the way so-and-so painted it, right? So looks great. Wow, here's Ravi. Ravi sent in, this is the version, or step 1, step 2. Oh, looks like Ravi had a landscape or something underneath here and then painted over top of it. Very interesting. A great way, maybe that was a painting you didn't like and recycled it into this one. That one turned out great. You can see the paint is much more opaque, thicker, more, less transparent paint than, for instance, the way Susan applied the paint, where it's a lot more transparent. I do think the way Kandinsky painted, not just in this painting, but throughout his career, was a little bit more transparent than we have here. I suspect that's probably because you added some white in here to cover the previous painting that was below that. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just recognizing that that's what you had to do to overcome that background, I think is a good lesson in and of itself. Heidi's version. Wow. That is interesting. Also, the color seems very warm too. I like that. One thing I like that you did here, Heidi, is really kind of, the painting is painted quite loosely. It doesn't look like you did too much fiddling with the details, right? You allowed a lot of kind of, we might say it's like a dry brush areas where the texture of the paper is coming through, and it gives things a little bit of a different kind of look than maybe even he had. I'd have to look at his again. But it's interesting. I feel like this here, we've got more yellow in the photograph. And then here, when we look at Susan's, there's more blue in the photograph. If we saw them in person, I think they would look very different. But anyway, it's again, whether you use that drier brush technique or go for, like what Ravi did here, much more solid lines, it's up to you. Just noticing. It's almost like as you go, as you paint, you can even literally make notes to yourself about how you're responding to the techniques and the processes and the artist's work. Literally starting to write down a list of like, I notice that I like a little bit more transparency in my paintings, or I like it when my paint is more opaque, or I like using dry brush, like I can't remember who it was here was talking about that, or I don't like using dry brush, and so on and so forth. And then you start making, you have this list of what you like, and sometimes you don't, maybe coming up with what you like is trickier than coming up with what you don't like. So even if you make that list of, yeah, I'm not interested in abstract painting, I don't like this technique, I don't like this technique, you might see, wow, there's a lot of stuff I don't like, but that's going to tell us actually a lot. And then from there we can kind of infer what you do like. And zeroing in on those things, I think, is really, 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 really important. I mean, that's what we do at art school, is really encouraging students to try to find their voice is by experimenting and trying as many different things as possible until, like, it just becomes very obvious to you what it is that you're most attracted to and what things you're just less interested in doing. It doesn't mean those things are bad artworks that you don't like doing. I always think, I'm so glad someone else is making that kind of artwork out there in the world, because that's just one less thing that I have to do, right? That looks great, Colleen. This one turned out really nice. That's really cool. So this is sort of like a little bit of both worlds here when we're, let's say, when we're talking about Heidi's painting here, where it's a little bit more transparent, a little bit drier brush, and Ravi, which is a little bit more opaque. Colleen, you've got almost a little bit of both here. I think this one turned out really nicely. That's a really nice version of Kandinsky's painting. Really cool. And Kathy's here, same sort of thing, very similar. Like a painting like this, Kandinsky did not make this painting with the end goal of exhibiting it somewhere, right? He was using these as like a color study for him to understand how color was working. And then I think later on, probably after he died, people went into his studio and were like, wow, this is some cool stuff. Like, I would pay $100,000 for this. And people are like, what? It's just a exercise that he did. No, I want that in my home. And for every person who's like, that's ridiculous, there's somebody else who's like, oh, That is the most amazing thing. Very cool. All great, 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 great. So let's move on to the more advanced Kandinsky we did here. This is Ravi's. I don't know if there was another version that you posted, Ravi, to the Facebook group. Maybe it was in one of the comment sections I missed. But I would love to see you tackle this and see how this painting turns out. Let's look at Sandra sent in some photos showing the progress of this painting in the finished version. Interesting. It does look like maybe some of this black was done a little bit quicker than what I've seen you be able to do in the past. Because that is really beautiful. I really like that. And I think maybe it's not this episode, but in a couple episodes, or when we look at whose art? Anyway, you've done some that are kind of like this, that are really nice. So it might have been that you're trying here, obviously, to use the paintbrush to do those dark lines, which is pretty tricky, right? Because having a continuous, sharp, straight line with the paintbrush is something that can take someone an entire lifetime to master, right? That's people who can do that become sign painters because they are so exceptional at being able to do that kind of stuff. That's not in my wheelhouse at all. But let's move on here. Paula's version. Ooh, cool, Paula. I like how you really amped up some of the purples in here, because this painting is it's got a lot of color, but it's also kind of muted. There's a lot of white in these colors. I like how you kind of turned up the volume, kind of like Spinal Tap, just cranked it up to 11. That's cool. That turned out really nice. And here's Pascal's. Wow, very expressive. That is like, whoa, how would I, whoa. It's like as if Willem de Kooning, the abstract expressionist painter from the 40s and 50s, took on Kandinsky here. That's sort of like what he would have done. Wild. And then there's Heidi's. Heidi says, it took me 6 sittings to get this painting done, so that's hours and hours and hours, which it shows, right? I mean, anyone who's attempted this painting or any of the paintings we've done looks at that and goes like, wow, that was some serious commitment. That looks great. So, but you know, I know like not everyone's got time to put 6 sittings into a single painting, but you can really, I'm sure as you worked on a painting like this, you learned a ton. It's like getting all of these really soft transitions and gradients in here. Whether, I'm sure there's a little bit of, must be some glazing fluid in there, which is very, very soft mixing of colors. It's really effective. Very cool. Great job, you guys. Okay, so let's move on from Kandinsky to look at Sonia Delaunay, the great Ukrainian artist. As I probably said before, being a Ukrainian person myself, Sonia Delaunay, because people have asked me who's your favorite Ukrainian artist, I would probably say that she is. In fact, I should have brought it down. I just got a really cool children's book on Sonia Delaunay's life for our daughter, which is a beautiful book. Anyway, let's. This was our more basic painting that we did. Here's Paula's. Whoa. Susan's. There's a few more I put in the Dropbox, and these were... oh, come on, where are we? Oh, jumped through a bunch here. So this looks like it went... Let's do that again, because something happened there. It stuttered there. Wow, look how different all of these are. That's so... Wow, so cool. And then Paula combined them to... Maria's... That's so cool. Okay, so let's start up here with the more basic one. So many comments in there. Heidi just got back from the women's dragon boat regatta. Whoa, that sounds cool. Must have been a little bit cold. It's a little chilly out there right now. Okay, so sorry. Let's look at this here. Paula's version. That is cool, Paula. I like your use of colors in here. I don't know if it's because I think often... Is this watercolor or... No, that looks like acrylic on paper, right? It does look like there's, again, a lot of... Or you're mixing white into almost every color here. Which is not, in and of itself, a bad thing. I mean, an artist like Giorgio Morandi, who we looked at a couple of years ago, he did still life. So I think it was maybe episode 5 or 6 of that previous acrylic series that I did. He used almost everything he does uses white. The one thing when we add white to a color, I think often what we think white is doing is it's brightening up a color, but what it's doing is lightening up a color. Right, and those words are often used interchangeably, but white, yes, it does lighten a color, so it goes from being dark to lighter in terms of value, but when we add white to a color, it also takes away the saturation of a color. So the more white you add to the color, the less vibrant and saturated that color is. So it loses its brightness and it gets lighter but less bright. Does that make sense? So one of the things, if we add white to all these colors, the colors start to get more pastel, and they go from being at the very top of the value scale to kind of going a little bit into more of a mid-range pastel kind of quality. So, which is not, again, a bad thing. Again, Morandi is famous for doing that. But with Sonia Delaunay, she's famous for her exuberant, bright, saturated color. And when we add a lot of white to it, we're taking away some of those gorgeous, bright colors. The easy thing to do, though, is if you paint white or mix white into something, and sometimes I do that to cover up another color underneath, is just to paint that same color without white over top of it. It's like, so for instance, let's say you've got these greens here. This looks like a bit of a teal color. If you were just to mix that green again and paint it right over those areas, all of a sudden it's going to become like very green. Same thing with this blue. Instead of... So, another thing you can do, for instance, let's say you... like you could take... Because let's say you say, well, if I put not baby blue, like ultramarine blue over this area, it's just going to be really, really dark. It's going to be like that. Yes, absolutely. But if we add glazing fluid or matte medium into our ultramarine blue, our warm blue, right out of the tube, we mix that in so it's more transparent. We can paint that over top of here. We're still going to have that saturated color, just less of it. So it's almost, as I'm talking about this, I feel like maybe I should, this would be something for kind of a bonus episode just showing the difference between adding white to a color versus adding medium to a color and glazing with it, because that way you'd still get the full intensity of that color, just less of it, versus adding white to that color, which will reduce the intensity of color. Anyway, I think I kind of went on. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody watching, but cool. So I think we have similar things here where we've got some white that Ravi's added into these colors to blend, but we still have lots of other colors that are fully saturated, right? Like these blues and greens in the darker areas of these purples, right? We still have color at its full saturation, and then we're mixing some white into them. And that helps give that modeling effect, right? That three-dimensional kind of quality. Really cool. Good job there, Ravi. Roxana. Wow, that is what a wild reinterpretation of this painting. That is so cool. And not only have you done these kind of wild things with these kind of or was that a pen underneath, but then the way that you've applied this texture over top is really neat. That is really cool. I mean, that what it's interesting because it does give a little bit of a vibrancy, or not vibrancy. It gives a energy to this painting, which is called Electric Prisms, right? It's all about her fascination with electricity, which is not the newest thing on Earth in 1913, but was new for, you know, she probably, when she was born, there was not electricity, or she had never seen it. And then all of a sudden you start seeing all of the gas lamps being taken down on the street out front of your house and replaced with electric posts, which is what she's describing in these paintings. Would have been quite exciting, maybe even a little bit alarming or strange or weird. And so in a way, these kind of lines give it that kind of frantic, jittery, what's going on? Right? That's pretty cool. I love that interpretation of this painting. Really neat. The one thing, sometimes if you add kind of more texture of paint, it can look a little bit, you can see how it gets a little bit darker like that. You may want to think about adding, if you're really interested in texture, adding a little bit of like modeling paste into your paint to beef up that texture area, so that it has a little bit more opacity or strength in the texture. So Susan's here again. This looks like there's a lot of white in this painting as well, and maybe I used a lot of white in mine. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it also looks a little bit bluish. That this might just be the way that it was photographed, I think. So, but I do like, I mean, one of the things I do like here is, especially in these areas where instead of, like, so for instance, I really like what's happening in this type of area here, where things are kind of a little bit fuzzy, where colors are sort of just kind of butting up against one another. Like, this is very much like an impressionist technique here. Where I think things are less successful is these areas where the colors, they just don't look very sharp, or like in an area like this. And I think one way you could do that is, take this same sort of approach for a line like that. So what I would mean is to do this type of line work here. It's like you're doing little brush strokes, kind of like Van Gogh, right? And you've got a little bit of paint, get a little bit more, do a little brush stroke. Here it looks like you've got paint on, and then you're trying to do this big full line. And I think if we were to use small brush strokes to paint this thing in the way that you did here, that type of, all of these lines would be much more effective. And even just imagine, instead of painting it in this way, what if we painted them like horizontally, right? So that everywhere we go, we have, so you might be kind of painting vertically, horizontally, so that wherever paint is kind of butting up against one another, we have softer edges. And the other way to go about it would be to go for harder edges. Like, I'm sure there's probably someone, I guess, a little bit in here, right? I don't know, just different approaches. I just think it's interesting to see how different styles are evolving. Very cool. And Roxana did this one too. And that looks, I don't know, it looks maybe, is that a Sharpie that you're using there? I think we've talked about using Sharpies. I would sort of discourage the Sharpie just because the Sharpie is not really intended for painting and drawing. It's going to kind of turn purple or green as time goes on. A much better thing to do would be to invest in acrylic paint pens. Posca pens is the most well-known brand of acrylic paint pens, and you've seen me use it many times, more and more these days, because it really helps speed up that process. Instead of doing all those fine lines like in that Kandinsky, right, that Sander is doing, you take a Posca pen, boom, you just draw with that pen, and it's very satisfying. It goes nice and quick. Beautiful job, Susan. I love this. Nice. I mean, I really liked this. That's why I included it in the Dropbox folder. Just didn't have time to paint it, but that's really neat. This is one of the patterns that Sonia Delaunay created for the clothing that she made, right? She opened her own store that was selling fabric and clothes that she designed. I just think Sonia Delaunay was such an amazing person. And it is exciting to me that as the years go by, she seems to be sort of going through a bit of a renaissance. Her artwork seems to be, she's being reappraised as the great artist that she always was, but was, like a lot of great female artists, not really acknowledged for during her time. Anyway, it's all, we've talked about that many times, as you know. Maria, that's great. That's really nice. We didn't do this painting in class, so I'm really excited to see that you tackled this and did a great job on your own doing it. Fantastic. And then Paula incorporated the other one here with her in the background. That's great. Paula, you're always impressing me with these funny and creative reimaginings or composting of different artworks together. You've done that with a few in the past. That's great. This looks really neat and well done. Let's look at Gail's here. Wow. That's great, Gail. I love the how much texture you were able to create in that background. That is really nice. And I think in this particular painting by Sonia Delaunay, what works really well is the contrast between these really intense, vibrant colors and the way that they're painted with kind of a lot of opacity, and then the background, which looks almost kind of worn and like weathered. You know, it's got that like a building or something that has been rained on for, you know, like a, what is it? Almost like a patina on a piece of steel or something, right? A Richard Serra sculpture. That's great. That's really nice. Really great job, Gail. Wow, and Heidi's version, very different. Interesting that, so you know what I think would work well, especially if we just look at what Gail did here. Look how she took this red, which is probably a combination of our cool red and warm red, maybe even more cool red in there, and painted it back over top, and how that pops, versus here this is a little bit more subdued, a bit more of a purpley, and there's a lot of white in here, which there is in Gail's as well, but it's more mid-range. I think doing what Gail did would actually give this even more energy than we have here. Because the background has a lot of energy. That yellow is really bright and is kind of competing with this more muted clothing and colors in the foreground, right? So we always want to think we want our most saturated colors closest to the viewer, and the least saturated colors in the background, because what that does is it creates depth. Even in an abstract painting, we can create depth by just using muted colors in the background. And by muted, we can add white to a color, we can add gray to a color, we can add black to a color. All of those are ways to lower the intensity, the saturation of that color. Throw that in the background, just like a mountain way off in the distance sort of looks kind of gray and pastel perhaps, right? Put that in the background, all of a sudden it looks like it's really, really, really far away. And then you put your bright saturated colors in the foreground and they pop, especially against. So right here, it's almost like that bright yellow is really capturing our attention and kind of pulling forward. And it's almost pushing the figure backwards, like as if that yellow is enveloping the figure, coming forward over top of them, which is not a bad thing in any way whatsoever. It's just one of those things to think about, like, because potentially you might really want that effect. You might want the effect of like a background that's enveloping the figure for some reason. Maybe I can't to give either a sense of someone being like warm colors that are kind of coming over and surrounding and protecting someone, or potentially like a negative force that is like kind of looming over top, right, and coming in and invading or something. That's cool. So it's just like we were talking here. Maria's got that background which is more subdued, and it really enhances and supports those much brighter colors in the foreground. That's really nice. Great job, Maria. I love that one. That's really cool. Wow. Susan, I love that too. So again, even though this background is very light, right? It's still muted. There's a lot of white in there, and we have much more saturated colors in the foreground that are popping. I would even say we could even have more of that on the figure. Interesting. And so Tanya, I have a Tanya and Tanya friend, and I can never get them straight. I'm always getting saying their name indifferently. But so again, we have this really, really intense yellow. I would think about, but it will be trickier to do anything with that background. So what I would try to do is just make this really bright pink, and it's just going to go pop forward, right? Wow, lots of comments in the chat here. So, how are we doing for time? Okay. I might stop here, and next episode we'll pick up where the Matisse and Paul Klee, Paul Cézanne, Michelangelo, Franz Marc, Van Gogh, David Shrigley, Monet, Rothko, Nicole Eisenman, Chagall, etc. That would be our next episode, and maybe I'll try to do that in a couple of weeks, because it's been a little bit of time between these episodes, just to kind of catch up to where we are now, because there's so much artwork that I want to cover. So in fact, what I want to look at next, wow, there's a lot here. Oh my goodness, you guys have been busy. I just want to kind of look at some more of the artworks that you guys did, based on maybe some past exercises we did in class, past paintings we did in class, and then we'll move into the ones that you guys did entirely on your own. So this one here is one of the Ted Harrison paintings we did. Ted Harrison being one of the great Canadian artists who died just a few years ago. I think probably after Robert Bateman, I would say Ted Harrison might be one of the most commercially successful Canadian artists of all time. There's a lot of his prints that are in homes and hotels, and especially, not so much anymore, but definitely was kind of almost ubiquitous throughout Canada. Anyway, I love this this version of the painting you did here. Really cool. That's great, Kathy. I painted this to counter the full rainy days. There's nothing more satisfying than on a cold day, you make a painting and it feels like, wow, I did something. It's sort of like I'm putting some warm energy back out into the world and helping the sunshine break through the clouds. That's awesome. Great job, Kathy. Here's Deborah's version here. Combined Yoshitomo Nara's famous hothouse doll with the Yayoi Kasuma's red hair and dots. That's awesome. This was a really fun, I mean, obviously Deborah's done a little bit of a unique take on this painting, but I really enjoyed making this painting. That was a really fun one, as well as we used, if you recall, I think it was like a cool red as our imprimatura, right? Normally, as you know, I use that warm yellow, or I recommend using a kind of a warm brown. Nara used this very, very different cool magenta to make that background have that weird, almost menacing energy. So that was a really kind of nice opportunity for us to see how different artists approach, especially the foundation of a painting, that first few steps. Really cool. Great job, Deborah. And this is Heidi did, this is the sketch that she did. It's worth just sort of zooming in on the sketch and then the painting. And I think she said something like, I feel like the sketch was better, or the sketches are always better than the finished painting. So what she's done here is taken the painting, was it Yu Peng? Who, I'm trying to remember now. Oh yeah, Sang Yu, right. So Sang Yu's painting of the cat that was licking water out of, or licking milk out of a bowl or a plate, and then combine this with Vigée Lebrun's sister who was looking in a mirror. So again, I love this idea of taking two very different paintings from totally different eras and mashing them up together to create this. Very funny. It's that's cool too. It's almost this object here seems also very personal. Like this is like out of like a jewelry box or something, and the cat's looking at their face in there. I like that. I feel like you also approached this cat a little bit differently than Sang Yu did. Sang Yu's style is even more loose than this, which is one of the I love Sang Yu's artwork. So it's like, not only are you taking, like, it's like you've taken a bit of Sang Yu's composition, you've taken a little bit of Lebrun's concept with the mirror, blended them together, and then used your own painting style on top of that to execute it. So it's not just two artists blended together, but three artists, and you're one of the three persons in there. I think that's really cool. Great job. You know, one could say maybe we could add a bit of a shadow on here, but I don't, that's, you know, for this type of a painting, I don't think that's necessary, right? Let's look at Richard's painting here. Richard did, this here is the Tom Thompson painting we did last summer. On the anniversary of Tom Thomson's death, we did, I think, 4 or 5 Tom Thomson paintings. And I'm currently working on the project I've been working on for the past 6 years as a graphic novel comic book adaptation of the life of Tom Thomson. And So I spend a lot of time thinking about Tom Thomson every single day, looking at his work as I'm drawing. So this is the original. This is the painting that Richard did last year, and then Richard went and revisited it and did it again. And I think in the comments also mentioned, because the original painting is either square or almost square. I think it is a little bit wider, not perfectly square, but I like how Richard's gone back and really just focused on painting the painting again, which is a great thing to do, right? Because one of the things that I always think about is, and this is exactly what the group of 7 artists, although Tom Thomson was not a member of the group of 7, they formed after he died, but a lot of the artists in that circle, of which Tom Thomson, basically after he died, that really inspired his friends to form a group of 7. He was even a part of the very first group of 7 exhibition, even though he had died. There was sort of like a room of Tom Thomson's work with an empty chair for Tom. One of the things that the group of 7 did was they often made these small sketches on canvases roughly about the same size as the ones that I've been using, these 9x12 size canvases, or panels, plywood sheets that they would use, and then paint those on location in Algonquin Park or nearby areas. Mostly they lived and worked in around Toronto. And then they would go back to their studios and then do another version of it. And I think one of the things we can take away from what we're doing in class is you do that first version of the painting. And probably it's not going to turn out exactly the way you want, right? And then when I say, like, if I make 100 paintings, if I can get 60 of them to turn out exactly the way I want, that's incredible odds, right? That's really good. Most of the time we don't get anywhere near that high. So even if that first pass, that first attempt, I get 30% done, that would be great. Think about a baseball player, the greatest baseball players of all time, Babe Ruth, Ohtani, or Votto. They hit the ball and get on base or score roughly 30% of the time. If you can do that 40% of the time, you are literally considered the greatest of all time. So for a baseball player, being successful 30% of the time means you're an all-star going into the Hall of Fame. If you can do it 25% of the time, or even 20% of the time, that's good enough to make you a couple $100 million as a professional in Major League Baseball. So just think about that kind of thing when you're thinking about painting. If I can do 20%, if 20%, 2 out of 10 paintings I make are good enough for me to want to show people or sell people, then that's an exceptional rate. If we can raise that, then you become one of the greatest of all time. So those of you who are like, man, I've done 50 of these paintings and only like 20 of them I feel good about, that's an incredible level of achievement. So you should expect that first time you do it that it maybe but you're going to learn a lot. And if you try to do it again, I guarantee you, it's going to become way better. It's possible you do it a second time and it turns out worse. There's always that possibility, but the likelihood is very, very low. Okay. Anyway, sorry, Richard, I just blabbed on about that, but that's really, really cool. You also really incorporated that much more, the graphic component, these horizontal lines that he did. I feel like, did he do the same thing with the water? Maybe he did that. I also really like the way that you approach the foreground too. If we just look at them in comparison. Very cool. I mean, even right there, we can see not only have you done the painting a second time and improved it, I think, in almost every way, but I think it also is a great documentation of your own ability improving, right? That's great. Okay, let's continue. I've got so much to talk about here. So here Sandra went back and says, I'm doing some oldies but goodies here. Here's Yu Peng, right? And this is, I really enjoyed this painting too. There's a couple more paintings by Yu Peng that I would like to do one of these days. That turned out great. And that seems to suit your own style really well too, Sandra. That's cool. I love how you also kind of, maybe this is for social media. Looks like you've kind of given it a different background, a little bit of a pink background maybe, or is that just the same? And then this one here is the Fra Angelico, the great medieval artist, or kind of early pre-Renaissance painter, I guess. Oh, so that's an earlier stage in the painting. This is when it's complete. Very cool. I mean, one thing that we often see in medieval painting is a little bit more of a tendency for outlining, just because of the essentially quite primitive materials and tools that they had even back then. So it's possible that we could do a little bit of outlining in this painting, let's say around fingers and clothing in the background, which would maybe bring it closer to the original, perhaps. But I don't know. I kind of like how that's done. There's an aspect to this that is, especially the way that you've done the folds here on Jesus, that is really impressive. There is one of the things that is kind of famous about this painting is the way that Fra Angelico did the cave and this weird rock formation. Might be something to investigate, or maybe there is a more finished version of this somewhere on the Facebook page that I missed, so I apologize if I missed that. But it looks very cool. Either way, I think it's just tackling that painting is impressive. Here's a couple more Sandra ones. Look at that. Salvador Dali. Wow. And I think I've mentioned before, this Dali painting, this was for me a big moment of recognizing the potential for these episodes and these classes to really go beyond just a 40 episode intro painting series and be like, wow, what if we could really go and tackle some pretty tough things, and we could probably do a pretty good job of it. So that was a big deal for me personally, and so I was really excited to see how many other people tackled that same painting and were able to do it really successfully and to build confidence, because Dali is one of the greatest artists from a purely technical perspective, right? We've whether you like Dali's paintings or not, some people even back in the day detested Dali. They just thought, I mean, the surrealist writer André Breton, who was the kind of the figurehead, or the really the founder of surrealism and the leader of surrealism, Breton despised Dali. He sort of regrettably embraced him because Dali was the most famous artist of his time, maybe beyond Picasso, and was most closely associated with surrealism. So he's like, it's like, okay, well, yeah, I'm sure he's a surrealist, but I hate the guy's guts. But Dali was, without a doubt, the most technically gifted and proficient painter of arguably the entire 20th century. Now, what he did with that ability and that talent is up for discussion. Some people like what he did, some people hate it, but he's certainly a great person to aspire to in terms of technique. The Botero painting, that's great. Good job, Sandra. I love that. I think did we not talk about, I feel like I mentioned something about those eyes being a kind of cartoony, and maybe we could make them a little bit more subtle by adding a little bit of gray in there, and also maybe bringing the eyelids a little bit down over top of the iris. Because if you just try looking into the mirror and try to get white to go all the way around your eyes, like, you gotta, like, it's just giving me a headache doing it right now. So when we see this in a painting, it looks very strange because we're not capable of doing it, even if we don't think about it ourselves. And obviously, cartoon characters, Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, have a big white eye with a little black dot. That's something totally different. That's how cartoonists have sort of played with and exaggerated human features. But all in all, great painting. Very opaque background. A lot of opacity in this painting, which is not bad. Botero is also kind of, I guess, uses paint quite opaquely. But I think we could even go for even more subtlety, a little bit more glazing to darken some areas, like underneath the arm and the crotch, armpits and stuff, inside the hat even. Kind of like what you did with the shadow, and I think we could even push that a little bit further. This one here, I can't remember, I think somebody was called the Vegetable Man, or somebody had a really funny way of talking about this character. The Giuseppe Arcimboldo painting. This artist is very famous, even though, you know, he's a contemporary of many of the greatest Renaissance painters like Michelangelo and Caravaggio. So he's painting at that same time. Like, this painting's from 1591, 450 years ago. But so strange and bizarre, right? If Dali painted a painting just like this, you'd be like, yeah, it sounds right out of Dali. But it was done 400 years before, 350 years before Dali. That's great. I mean, this one was a tall order, so I think you did a really, really great job with that. It also looks like you sort of expanded. We've got these big shoulders here. Or was there more? I can't remember what was on there, but that's great. We'll keep on plowing ahead. We got so much to look at. Here's Sandra did the Thomas Kincaid painting, I think for her grandmother. So we just saw a few steps there as it was being created, and eventually, I think just recently posted this to the Facebook group. So finally finished it. Looks great, and I mean, I can't remember exactly how successful I did this painting, but you may have even have improved on some of the things I did here. Like, I really like this kind of peachy color that you used here in the snow in the foreground. It does give it that really nice sunset type of a glow on the snow. Really nice touch. Really cool. I don't know what else can I say on that. That's great. And then let's just look at Vanya here did the Rembrandt. You could see that, I think, probably from further away, especially sometimes that happens. You know, the photos we take don't quite accurately convey the painting. So from further away, I think we can really see how that subtlety of the shadows. I think it almost looks like there's a little bit of white in this area, which is, from further away, I don't think it's so noticeable. Here, it does seem to be slightly odd. Like, I think we could darken that even more. Like, I think you could even darken this whole face even more, which sounds kind of scary, because it's like, whoa, then we're not going to see the eyes, they're going to disappear. But think about the concept behind this painting is that those eyes are almost invisible, right? It's one of those things that you keep pushing and pushing and pushing with very thin, dark glazes over that, and maybe, again, after a few, you want to let it dry or blow dry it, because sometimes it can look darker, or it might end up being darker than you think it is. But having those eyes, they're just barely there, so someone looks at it and then like, oh, there's eyes in there. Oh, that's kind of a little shock. I didn't expect that. Okay, so many comments. Let's see if I just... Deborah says, I would like you to add a class where white versus mediums. It would help me. I have on my calendar a class scheduled to talk about different whites, because that's something I've wanted to do for a while. So maybe I could fold that into that episode. Just to think about that. In fact, I just want to make a little note for myself here. So that's glazing. Okay, just want to make sure. Rachel asks, what about Ken Danby? Ken Danby. Well, we did do a Ken Danby painting. I'm not sure what the question there, Rachel, is. I'm sure we talked about Ken Danby many months ago. So, and we looked at the work that we did. So I'm not. What was that in reference to? That was a little while ago. You have to remind me, Rachel. Carly says, hey, everyone, just popping in here for a moment. Question for Michael. What paintings are you going to cover in the next couple of weeks? I want a small scoop, not the whole container. Well, you can see in the Dropbox folder what all the episodes that are coming down the pipeline are. And, I mean, I can just pop up the schedule here. So on Tuesday we're doing Barnett Newman's Voice of Fire, and we're doing two different Barnett Newman paintings. So Barnett Newman's an abstract painter. On next Thursday we're doing Pablo Picasso's Olga. Then the next week we're doing Andy Warhol's 8 Elvises. On the next week after we're doing Picasso's Guernica. Then we're doing Paint the News, the Stanley Cup. Then we're doing another Picasso. Looks like a bunch of Picassos next week, because we're looking at some of the most expensive paintings of all time. We're doing a painting for Juneteenth, the emancipation of slavery in the United States. Van Gogh, Robert Henry, the kind of founder of the Ashcan School, very famous. Not so famous anymore, but really one of the most influential artists in 20th century American art. A big influence for someone like Edward Hopper. I want to do a painting, an Elvis painting, since there's an Elvis movie coming out soon. There's another Van Gogh, is it Portrait of Joseph Roulin? We're doing Van Gogh's Irises. One of that painting's at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. So lots of stuff coming up down the pipeline. There's a Peter Doig painting for Canada Day, the Roswell crash in New Mexico. Yeah, so plenty of stuff to keep you busy there. What else? Emerson says, yeah, it's crazy that he lived until 1989. I think that's Dali. I think, yeah, I think you're talking about Dali, because Dali did live until, was it 89? When did, or are you talking about, yeah, it must be, because that's who we were talking about, right? Okay, so let's progress forward here. So we've got a bunch of artwork here by Alex, who's been drawing like a wild man who is on fire here. So and also one of the things that I think is just one of the most incredible things to come out of these episodes is that a number of people within our group here got together to buy some art supplies for Alex, who lives in Nairobi, and he was able to pick them up, and it's really helped him improve, because he was just using pencils and lined paper, and now he has some proper art materials to draw with. Proper sketchbook and pencils, colored pencils, as well as pastels and watercolors. So special thank you to those of you that were a part of organizing that and putting that together. That is just blows my mind. I remember when I was telling my wife about that, I was just like, this is way beyond anything I could ever have expected to come out of that. So thank you again to that. So let's just take a look at Alex's artwork here. He's using his new pencils here. Very cool. If you're watching Alex, I would strongly recommend that you do the drawing course that's here on YouTube. It's free. I think it's in the video description below. If you click on that, you can there's 45 episodes of that, each one focusing on different things. I think it would be really, really helpful. Obviously, you're doing really great with drawing, but it might be nice for you to get some more fundamental, especially when we're talking about, like, because it looks like you really like drawing faces, and I think there's probably, out of that 45 episode series, maybe there's 15 or maybe more that focus just on the human body, faces and hands and ears. I think there's episodes on just noses, just eyes, lips, etc. Right? So very cool. But I also, again, I love this kind of the energy and spirit of these drawings. Yes, there is some distortion of these figures, but that's the story of art over the past 150 years, is how artists, rather than try to make things look like a photograph, they start using their own, they're expressing the world as they see it, right? And, Picasso being probably the most famous, or Dali expressing what's inside of his imagination, right? Or his dreams, right? That's surrealism. That is great. That's a really cool drawing. I love that one a lot. That is awesome. This is, again, using these new pencils that you guys provided him. Wow, what a massive leap forward he's been able to do, thanks to you guys. That's great, Alex. Your use of colors in here is really exciting, and I can't wait to see, as you progress, the more you use color. These are really cool. Really great. Huh. Wow, the folds in the clothing. That is awesome, Alex. Really, really good. One of the things I would say is you've got a lot of this dark outlining here. I think that is definitely, it's kind of competing with the hands. I think if we have that dark on the fingers as well, and maybe a little bit lighter on the dress behind, that would be very effective. Remember, we want our darkest colors, like our blacks and our most saturated colors, to be in the foreground, right? That'll give depth and space. Wow. Circus Mayhem. Awesome. Wow. That's awesome. It looks like you're using a grid for this. And look how, like, everything is proportionally, quote-unquote, correct. Wow. That is awesome. That's the best one I've seen you do so far. That is great, Alex. Really, really nice. Now I think the next step is to push your contrast between light and dark. If we can get some of these dark areas to get darker, that'll be even better. And this is neat too. A lot of soft blending. Looks like you're blending with your finger and smudging those together. Really nice. Great. Look at that color. Wow. And again, you're using that grid to help with her face. Great proportions and everything. That is really, really nice. That is, I really like the color. Like, it seems kind of strange to put yellow right there, and purple, and red, and orange. But we have those colors, especially when light was bouncing off our faces from around us. That's how we see things, right? That's really, really nice. Great job. Wow. That's great, too. That is cool. I love the way you did the hair. All of that patterning. Really nice, subtle use of that blending. I think is that some charcoal that was in there, I guess, or the side of that pencil. Really cool. Yeah, I would love, Alex, to see if you did some of those exercises in that drawing series. If you upload that to the Facebook group, I think that would be really inspiring for other people as well to see how well. Because I'm sure, obviously, you're exceptionally talented already, and if we continue that, man, you could easily make a career out of making these portraits. That's great. This looks like it's in progress here. Look at those eyes. Noticing the details in the inside the eyes. Landscape. First time ever using oil pastels. Oil pastels are tricky. That is one of the trickiest materials. I think oil pastels and watercolor are some of the most difficult things. That is great. I love this. Here you're using your new watercolor set. Really cool, because what this does is starts to blur and blend. I think it's going to suit your style really, really well. We just have a few more. Oh, by Alex. That's cool too. Wow. Man, it's so exciting. This is, for me as a teacher, seeing people grow and getting better from artwork to artwork is like, that's why somebody gets into teaching, is because you want to help people, right? I feel so passionate about art, and seeing people embrace art and get better and better at it, and they start feeling more confident about it, is just like, that's what it's all about for me. Really nice. Wow, that oil pastel, just over a short period of time. Look at how these are just getting better and better. And you've got a lot here, so I want to move on looking at some of the artwork by some other people here, but again, this is just very, very inspiring. Wow, Nelly. That's great. And the subtle, again, that blending that you're getting, noticing those details. Not even just doing them, just the first thing of noticing, like the frown, and getting that little bit of darkness in there, and where the highlight is on his nose and cheekbones. Chef kiss, as I've seen a few people do in the chat there. Great. Wow, you got a lot in here, Alex. You've been busy. Wow. Here's another one. Oh, this looks familiar. Our drawing teacher. That's great. Thank you very much. That's great. It looks like I was wearing one of my sweaters there. My pink sweater, perhaps. Here's using the grid again. Wow. Very, very impressive. And then I think this is the last one here. It looks like you've drawn on your hand. That's cool. Are you going to get into making tattoos next, Alex? Very cool. Okay, now we're going to look at, switch to different artists. This is Joshua, or Carlito, as I guess he's changed his name on the Facebook page there, so we'll call you Carlito, I guess. So I'm not sure what this looks like. Is that Holbein? Is that Holbein who did this painting? I don't think you put it in the comments, but I think that looks like kind of his style. This is Turner painting. I think I included this in the Dropbox folder. Anyone who's interested. This is, what's this one called? It's like, but it's a train coming towards us on the horizon, from the horizon there. Wow. Here's your George Washington. I love how you hung that little dollar bill next to it. Wow, that is impressive, Joshua. It's great to see is this done in oil paint too, perhaps? Just because of the way that I see the blending happening, that looks kind of like it's trickier to do that kind of thing in acrylic paint. So I would imagine that's oil, most likely. These are great. That is really nice. I think you just posted this today, El Greco. That's cool. Really nice job of these hands. And obviously this accessory, I don't know what that's called, this sort of accordion that goes around the necks of, we see this in a lot of Dutch paintings of the 16 and 1700s. That is very tricky. I should put that on my list of things to do, but that would just be like, because it's, to pull that off is no easy feat. Great work. Really, again, I really particularly like the hand and even the expression on this face. And here's a drawing you did. Cool. Okay, let's move on here. Here's a painting by Carolyn. I was talking about taking an Indigenous Studies course, and how when she grew up there was no mention of Indigenous history in Canada or the United States, and sort of feeling now that more of the history of the first people here in North America is being talked about, and which is long overdue. It has made her sort of rethink celebrations like Canada Day, and which I think all of those things are great discussions for us to have, and I think that's the first step. You know, the friends of mine and colleagues who are Indigenous or American Indian, if you live in the United States, I think that's the very least that we can do, is just to have those moments of self-reflection and to think about what we can all do to kind of ameliorate, to improve the relations that we have with the people that were here for about 40,000 years before white settlers came into this land, right? I mean, there were people living in North America, living where I am right now, about 30,000 years before the pyramids were built. Just think about that, right? So when people talk about, you know, Columbus discovering North America, and like, why is that offensive? Well, it would be like as if I just, you know, went over to your house, set up a tent, and said, "Well, look, I discovered this pristine property," right? You're like, what? Are you insane? Anyway, I could go on about that. It's just interesting. But yeah, great painting here. I love your concept behind the painting, and the spirit behind it is something that I feel very strongly about. Let's look here at Deborah's flowers here. This is the first version, and said that did not like the dark spots inside, and here's the second version. Interesting. I can see what you're saying. I don't know if I mind it so much, but I also, if this is the finished version of it, I think it looks great. You know, even little subtle things like this, I don't know how visible this is. It could just be the reflection, but using those horizontal brush strokes down here has the effect of helping to put that vase on a place, right? It sits on that table, and as opposed to floating in a blank space. And so even if this background is just all black and there's no shadow or highlights, those horizontal lines are going to emphasize that there's something that it can be sitting on, which I think is really really impressive. Isaac says, I sent more drawings for you to look at on Instagram. I hope I improved from last time. I appreciate your honest feedback on them. It would mean so much. Oh, you know, I'm sorry. I haven't looked at the Instagram or Twitter feeds. I was getting there was so much stuff just on the Facebook group, so I will make a point to take a look at the Instagram, because I think there was a few other people who sent things, so I apologize, Isaac. I did not see that. Okay, let's continue moving forward here. So here's Deborah's painting here of her and her husband's kayaks, Kermit and Red. That's great. And you know what's really interesting is how similar, this reminds me a lot of some of the quote-unquote early Tom Thompson paintings that he did. Tom Thompson, you know, it depends on how you want to consider what his early period was. Like, he really only painted for about 5 years from up until the time he died in 1917. But some of the paintings he was doing in 1912, 1913 look a lot like this. Even the color palette and the way that he painted those trees, that's really cool. Even the kayak, I feel like he did a painting just like this of his canoe, and maybe Deborah's sitting there like, yeah, that's what its painting's based on, duh. But that's really cool. I love that you've named your kayaks. That's cool. And then Deborah says, for a few years now I wanted to paint my grandkids with their fancy umbrellas walking in the rain, so I did it. That is awesome. Very cool. I think there's a number of smart things that you've done in this painting. One of which, it kind of appears like you may have done the like a vertical background first, to give us that sense of water coming down from the sky, and then painted this horizontal. There's a little bit of horizontal. I guess it's I'm seeing these white dashes, and then the really nice reflection below that subtle, probably kind of a glaze or matte medium in there, and their clothes and jackets. I love all that. I think it's great. This really nice painting. I'm trying to think, is there anything I could help improve? Even the splashes on here are nice. One thing I like about this paint, or the photograph, is these leading lines, like the diagonal lines on the street. I'm almost compelled to want to see that more, because right now our sort of with this horizon line right there, it makes us think like, are they about to go over a cliff? Like, what's behind here? Or is this a wall? They're walking up to a concrete wall. So I think one of the things that I see here is this often in a landscape, we have some sort of a pathway that leads us deep into the painting. You may want to think of in a future painting is including that type of a pathway, those leading lines that pull us deep into the painting, and thinking about like these two children who are growing up and they're walking away from us. Where are they walking to? Where are they going? Who are they going to be? Like, is there something very subtle off in the distance? Like maybe it's raining right where they are, but off in the distance there's a castle in the sun or something, right? Again, it might be a lot to ask, but I'm just saying that you've done a great job here. So it's like, okay, what would be the next step? Let's say this would become part of a series. Very cool. Here's another one by Deborah here. What was this one called? This was Heather in Scotland, I think. Heather on the Hills of Scotland. That is really nice. How is that, watercolor? Looks like water, or very, very thin acrylic. But either way, really nice. I like how this one turned out. The colors are quite muted, so maybe that does seem very watercolory-ish. Oh, it's right here. It's painting with watercolors, of course, right? Let's say, do we want more saturated colors? Maybe not. Maybe it's good like that. I guess no, I think it's fine. It's fine. This one here is based on a Lucius O'Brien Sunrise in Saguenay, Quebec. That is cool. Wow. I'm not familiar with this artist or this particular painting. So it's hard to say how similar it is to the original, but using some of the things we talk about in class and some warmer and cool colors, I think is effective here. I'll have to do a little more research on this. This is another painting. I think Deborah just posted this right before class began, and based on a tutorial from another teacher or course or class, but added some like champagne glasses in the foreground. That's really nice. So this is an example of a painting that has a lot of pastel, a lot of colors that are lighter, less bright, but then we have these little pops of fully saturated color. So the red without white in here, yellow without white, some purple and blues without white. So which is great, right? Because what that does is it helps those colors to really pop. It gives them a lot of power because there's a lot of contrast, right? Just think about how let's say if you're looking at your front lawn and it's all nice and green, you've been watering it, and there's one yellow dandelion in there, right? It is impossible not to see. It just pops. It sticks out like a sore thumb, right? And that's the same sort of thing we can think about in painting. Like if we have a lot of more muted colors and then we have some saturated colors, those saturated colors pop just like that dandelion. So what else? Is there anything I can suggest here? Potentially, you've got the shadow coming from, or the light is coming from the window behind here, and it's casting these shadows from the vase and the both vases. You may want to consider having a shadow coming towards us also from the rose and the champagne glasses. Just a little suggestion. And maybe, we have these diagonal lines coming this way. You may want to have them going maybe more vertically or even diagonally in the other way, potentially. But really nice. I really like how that turned out. Great job. Wow, this is nice too. I wonder what that's based on. Michael, there's something very soothing about listening to you talk about your painting process while I finish another painting. It's great. Yeah, that's really cool. Again, okay, so here's a great example. We were just talking about with these muted colors versus more saturated colors. You got your very saturated colors, these blues in the foreground, and you've got fairly saturated greens, but you've got some white in there. And then as we get further away, more and more white and gray in those colors, even in the sky, and they just seem further away. They just naturally go backwards, so that we don't have to work so hard with our composition to create depth. Really great job. Okay, here's another one. Michael was just talking about paintings, finishing paintings you have on the go. That is really nice. That's cool. It almost looks like you painted the background after some of the foreground things. Maybe you weren't happy with this blue, and it's what's nice is it's sort of really kind of tightened up these shapes. Something that I've been thinking about doing with the George Washington I just did the other day is I was like, that background, if I did paint it a little bit more in the background, I could really tighten up some of the little bit looser areas around the edges that got kind of out of control as I was glazing. One of these days I want to do a series of episodes where I go back and quote-unquote fix paintings I'm not so happy with, and just showing how that process would work. Okay, here's Dion. Dion took one of my drawing classes 2.5 years ago and has been doing a lot of cats since COVID. These are great. Wow, I love this one. This is one of my favorite. This is fantastic. This would make for a really nice card or a print, and you could put this on Etsy and I'm sure people would buy them. Really good. I really like this, Dion. Let's look at another one. Wow, look at that. Wow, that is very impressive. As many of you know who've tried to draw fur, that is really good. It also takes a lot of patience to kind of keep some of those white areas without getting them too dark. Very, very time consuming, but really, really pays off. Wow, another one. This reminds me of Edvard Munch. All of these look like Edvard Munch prints. Just like because Munch was a master at contrast. Edvard Munch did the Scream painting, that really very famous painting, which we did, or I did, probably like 8 years ago, in one of the first YouTube tutorials that I did. It's like 8 minutes long, kind of speeds through, so it's not one of these 4-hour episodes. If you want to do that one. Anyway, Munch did a great job. Okay, so here's Donna's. So, okay, this is the Tom Thompson. Okay, because I knew there was... Let's go back up here, Deborah. So there's Deborah's version with Kermit in red. And then we go to here to Donna with the Tom. I knew there was a Tom Thompson like this. Okay. Sandra says, oh my god, I love these kitties. Absolutely. Deborah says, I love those drawings, amazing. I've tried to draw and paint my little fur babies. I still need to work on it, and definitely tricky. Okay. Oh, sorry, Donna, these are great. I don't know what to say about this painting. I think you did a great job. I can't quite remember this Tom Thompson painting that both of you and Deborah painted on, but I think you've both done a pretty exceptional job with it. I mean, maybe the one thing I would probably say is if I recall, at this time in Tom Thompson's career, he's painting kind of a little bit thin. So whereas you've got a little bit thicker, more opaque paints in here, I'd have to think about it. But I especially like the way you did the water, and that's something obviously Tom spent more and more time focusing on. Wow, Eleanor, woo! Those are gorgeous flowers. That's a really nice painting. So this is another great example of contrasts, right? Because here if you were to, like, I don't know, boil this painting down, we would see that 80% of this painting, or the colors in this painting, have white in them, or so I would say maybe, and that would include our grays, because gray has white in it, right? And then we would find that maybe 10% of the painting has color at its full intensity. So there's a little bit of the green that doesn't have any white, and very little of the magenta, this red, is left on its own. And so what that does is that contrast, I know that I've said that word 100 times, that would be a good drinking game for this episode, is contrast is one of the most important tools that we have as painters to create depth and even to convey emotion in a painting, right? So because, you know, I think I hear people talk about all the time, like, oh, my paintings are all muddy, they're all brown, everything's gray, as if that's a bad thing. Most paintings, at least the most famous paintings, are quote-unquote muddy and gray, except they have areas, pockets of saturated color. And it's those pockets that we think of. We think, wow, there's a lot of blue and green and purple. But really, it's almost like someone garnishing a steak or something afterwards. Just that little bit. It's not soaked in salt. There's just a little bit sprinkled on top, and it's that little flavor right at the end that kicks in and pops. Really cool. Here's another one by Eleanor. This waterfall, that's great. Really beautiful. And the way that these trees are done, there's kind of like a group of 7 quality to that. Who did that? Is that Lismer that paints trees like that? Lismer or Holgate? One of the group of 7, and there were, how many? I think there was 12 members ultimately of the group of 7, because some of them left and some people joined up. But yeah, that's well, I'm sure. It looks like you took a workshop with Heather Pant, another artist. So they probably talked about that in there. Let's look at it. Wow, that is cool. That's really nice, Eleanor. That's great. Really nice. I mean, painting all those, that takes time, but it's very effective. Right? And I could imagine, you know, when someone's doing something like this, they just feel like, it's kind of muddy and mushy. But we don't really spend that much time looking at those things. It becomes sort of just I don't know how it's, the painting without it falls apart. And so it's essential, but people don't really notice it, right? You know, it's the same, I don't know, I always think of analogies. It's the same sort of thing, like, let's say you go and see a musician performing, and, I don't know, like, I just saw Paul McCartney recently, and he's amazing, and you spend 95% of the time watching Paul McCartney singing on stage. He also has this great backing band that he's had for like 30 years or more. And they're all incredible musicians that any band would die to have. and we don't really spend any time thinking about it or looking at them, watching them, ogling them. But without them, the rest of the show would be, you know, Paul McCartney did some amazing stuff playing by himself on guitar, that's for sure. But would he be able to sustain a 2.5-hour show, which he did, without them? No. And you'd be like, well, it's good, but yeah, I don't know. Whereas he uses all of those people around him to support him and really make a really impressive show. So it's the same sort of thing, how important that can be. Eleanor's talking about my dog. Recognizes Michael's voice and loves being part of my painting hobby. When he hears Michael's voice on YouTube, he knows it's painting time. That is so adorable. That makes me so happy. That is so cool. And then, of course, you made a painting of your little fur baby. Aww. She recognized herself when it was done? Oh my goodness, that is so sweet. Really nice. You know, I think we've talked a few times about signatures, and I think prior Eleanor was using a really dark black signature, and look at how subtle this signature is now. How it's there, but it kind of just blends in, and unless you're really looking for it, you don't see it, or at least you can kind of ignore it. And then you can look for it, and you can ignore it, and it doesn't kind of take over the composition. That's something I absolutely love. Great job. Great, great, great job. Here's another one, the Bay of Fundy. I took a photo of that area. Here's my version of the photo. Interesting. Again, I like the signatures quite muted down here. One of the things, there's a few things, like the foreground here is a little bit undefined, right? It's almost like part of me wants to kind of crop this. Where'd that go? Because this area in the foreground is a bit of an afterthought. Like, I feel like we either want this shoreline to kind of curve around, oops, and there to be a crab or something scuttling across. Like, I think there needs to be something in this area to give us a reason for it being there. So, and same thing with the sky. Like, the sky is I mean, I know I've been to Bay of Fundy, and if you're there on a really nice sunny day, the sky can be gorgeous. But just like here in Vancouver, it can also be blah, gray and overcast. Nothing wrong with a gray overcast sky, but it's not very exciting in a painting. It can just sort of be this dead area. So what I would, there's two ways you could go about it. One is to fake it and put in a big, beautiful sky with clouds, or a sunset situation, and to fake that out. And obviously some of these colors would change as well. And so then you could do something where you really focus on the sky, and we can just crop out this whole bottom down here. Or you can move the other way, and we could really kind of crop out this whole sky and focus on the ground. I think this is in many ways, this is not a painting issue. This is a drawing issue, a compositional thing, which we tend to kind of associate more with drawing. So clearly, you're an incredible artist, and you know how to use color and all these various different kind of painting techniques. Here it's the composition that needs some other element, or it needs to be kind of played with. Because for those of you who don't know about the Bay of Fundy, it's this very famous location in eastern Canada where the tide rises dramatically. Like, so literally at one point of the day you can walk on this beach, and then at another point in the day you'd be, if you're not standing on top of here, you're underwater, right? So it's kind of an amazing place where the tide really changes dramatically every day. And I sort of, I'm not sure this painting is fully conveying the magic of that space. I'd have to think about it. I've never painted a Bay Fundy painting, but I feel like I have to think about like what would be the composition that would capture that. And so that might be looking at artwork by other artists and thinking about who's done a painting of the Bay of Fundy that you find like just really communicates that concept best, and then literally making a few copies of that, trying to steal some of what they've learned and incorporating it into your own artwork. Okay, let's move on here to Gail. Gail's done a couple of this one, obviously we looked at a number of her other paintings. This one here, this fun abstract gal bombshell today. It reminded me of Easter eggs. That's interesting. It's funny, I have a friend who looks exactly like this with that pink hair, so it's funny. I don't know if there's anything. I would suggest sort of what we've talked about with Eleanor is maybe incorporating a different cut. Like, for instance, if your signature was in magenta, right? This kind of, or like a purple, I think that would suit it better than, I guess that is purple, but it's just so dark. It's just a personal thing. And I'm sure we could line up 50 other artists that would disagree, but I always like, if you're going to sign the front of a painting, to make it almost as subtle as possible. Even someone like Picasso, as much of a braggadocious kind of person as he would still try to find a way to fit his signature somewhere in there, so that you could see it if you're looking for it, and you wouldn't have to look that hard, but you could also kind of look at it and it wouldn't be jumping out there. So let's look at some paintings by Greg here. He's got a number of excellent ones, and this is gorgeous, Greg. And this came out of a discussion in the Facebook group about how to do backgrounds that are a little bit blurry. And we have done a few paintings that have a little bit of a blurry background. And to do that kind of thing, you want to obviously work on that background a lot before you even get into the foreground, because that way you can get the blurry sky or the blurry trees or buildings or whatever they may be, and then you can paint over top of it and integrate it better into the overall thing. But really excellent job. I'm sure this is the kind of thing that a lot of people watching right now are like, wow, I would love to be able to do that, Greg. So that's really, really cool. I mean, the detail in the feathers, really, really excellent. Really, really great job. A+. And here's one you did of clouds. Another absolutely awesome clouds. These kind of the pinks and stuff in here really suggest the light struggling to get through these dark, heavy clouds, right? And it gives us a sense that, oh, maybe the sun's about to pop through. Yeah. Sometimes when you post really great, there's nothing much to say about it, but just like, great job. Let's move on. Greg also did a whole bunch here on Tintin. And actually, as I was getting these ready this morning, I thought these were just some photos or scans that you were posting as inspiration for someone like Paula. And I'm like, oh no, those are actually paintings that Craig did. That is pretty impressive. I'm a huge Tintin fan. So this is hits home. These are great. You know, I would say in a painting like this, maybe there's a shadow on the ground, because right now he could be falling out of an airplane, right? It's not clear what his relationship is to the world around him, right? So some kind of shadow would help us go like, oh, okay, he's walking through some, you know, maybe a foggy situation or something. That's why the sky, there's no background. Love this. The whole time where Tintin goes to the moon. That's awesome. That's really nice. And then this racing around the corner. That's great. What's also interesting is there's like a texture in here. What is... It's almost like, is there sand or something that you've put in the paint, like we did with the Burluck painting? Why does it have that grainy quality? That is so interesting. Or we also did eraser shavings in it. It's very strange. Not in a bad way, just very unique. Because one of the things we think about comics is they're flat, right? They're printed onto paper, whereas here you're making us know that this is a painting based on a comic potentially, but that it's a painting and not a print. So it's potentially kind of contradictory, but I kind of like it. I mean, same sort of thing like when we see the texture of the background strokes in there. This is funny with him with the paintbrush. Again, I would say it would be nice to have a shadow down here somewhere. Let's move on here. Heidi's got some squirrels. She called it, "Do you have a treat for me?" And was walking in Stanley Park and I saw a squirrel running over. This is a funny little triptych of squirrels here. Obviously, I mean, very tricky to do that that fur. I like how you did. You did a really good job on that. You know, again, it's sort of like we were just talking about with Greg and shadows. I think it would be nice to have at least some hint of some type. Just again, doesn't have to be like a big black shadow. Just a little bit of like a darker color with a little bit of glaze and just a subtle little thing going in whichever direction you want. I think would be nice. Let's look at this. Beautiful job, Heidi. I think, did we... Maybe this is a different... Or is this an older one that you framed, or is this a brand new one? Really cool. I mean, these reflections coming from above are awesome. Really nice. And what's kind of neat about that is kind of the inversion. Typically, we would see like the sky up on top, and we would have the ground and below. So here we've got the reflection of the ground on top and the reflection of the sky below. So there's something really playful about that. This looks like this is some sort of plant in the foreground. I think you could probably get away without having that there, or define it more. I'd probably lean to getting rid of it. Personally, not a big deal. I don't mind it being there, but I think it's enough without it. Now, this was a painting that Heidi says I couldn't get the sky blue with her 6-color palette. This is what my result. I think you did a pretty good job. There was some sort of chatter about using cobalt blue and instead getting another tube of paint, getting a different blue to use on top. And I think Pascal was talking about going and buying a green, an emerald green. You can do that. There's no law preventing you from doing it. I think you can easily get this color from the colors that we have. I think what this would require is probably this right here. Like, I think your instinct is to say cobalt blue is probably pretty accurate, because this is, and so cobalt blue is basically just the color that exists in between our cool blue and our warm blue, right? So mixing those two colors together, you're going to get that cobalt blue, which some people would say is a quote-unquote primary blue. I would totally disagree, and there's a mountain of evidence that would I know I'm not going to get down that trap, but I think you've done an excellent job. One thing I think is really, really nice that you picked up on here is how you've got this little bit of orange. I think you probably painted orange for the sun and then painted this yellow, whitish yellow over top. And what that does is it gives that sense of the light being so bright, right? Which we see in here as well. Right, the contrast, that little bit of color on the corona of the sun there, I think is really, really cool. Let's move on to hollies here. That is cool. So holly's got a lot of stuff in here. So we'll talk about this one. Actually, let's go. That's the first version. Here's the painted version. And then I think this is the final version. So it's really nice to see the development of this concept of this bird. And what's really nice is to see just like how you're able to create some depth with these, like for instance, these trees in the background are very branches are very loosely painted, like with a little bit of glazing fluid perhaps, and they're not even really fuzzy, they're just kind of semi-transparent, and they seem to kind of float really nicely backwards into space. It does seem like there's, like, they're not matching up entirely. Like this one like, where does this branch go? And even though I guess this one is attached to that, it feels to me like it's wants to continue. Like, I think it should be integrated somehow on there. I mean, tiny little things, but I actually really appreciate that, like, for instance, this tree branch is just left as a dry brush, right? Like, that is really bold. That takes a lot of courage to do something like that. And I really applaud. Like, I think this is really excellent painting, Holly. Really cool. And then here's a series of paintings that she did of looking at reflections of this little fish in a bowl. So here's where it began. And then we have kind of these stages where the painting keeps getting developed. Like, look how beautiful that is. So this is, and then the color is introduced. I think a lot of people will be very happy with the painting like this at this stage. And the color is really nice. I think you could be very happy with this. So it looks like we're using a style that we talked about. We talked about this a few times, maybe a while ago. So this technique is a very traditional, very academic approach to painting. We call it grisaille, like a gray, working in grays, and paint the whole painting in gray. And then the very last step is to put the colors in. And one reason artists do this type of thing is that it helps you really get the composition and the value relationships. Value, again, being contrast between light and dark. It helps you get those locked in. And then you just put the color in almost as like icing on top of the cake, right? All of this is the structure, the fluffy cake underneath the icing, right? And without it, you just got a plate of icing. Who wants to eat a bowl of icing? Like, maybe licking a couple spoons from the mixer is delicious, but eating a whole bowl of it would be like torture, right? So I think it's really, really nice. I really appreciate that you use this technique to do this. I think we should do that again, because there's probably a lot of new people watching who haven't done that technique or didn't watch those episodes. What was that? That was it was the Artemisia Gentileschi painting we did probably almost 2 years ago. So it's probably worth looking at that again. Let's look at Holly, sorry, was working on a commission for, I think, a friend. So this is day 8 of this painting. Been working on it for a while. Coming along. The background looks amazing. And then look at that. Is this the same? Yeah. So I think that's the finished version, and that's with the photo next to it. Wow. Really cool. So there's a lot of work going on in here. Holly says, critical eyes, please. I mean, I don't know what what could you offer. I mean, this is obviously, it shows that the amount of time and focus that you've put into making this painting. So I'm really impressed by that. I don't know, Holly. I don't know if there's much in the way of criticism that anyone could give you on this. The background, if we just start there, is exceptional. It actually reminds me a lot of, there's some Tom Thompson paintings that he did, I think in 1915, of flowers that look a lot like this. He didn't do butterflies, but he painted some flowers like this that really reminds me of, they're really beautiful. And I mean, there's just like, this attention to detail is fantastic. In terms of the rest, like her hair is beautiful. I love the way that you did the hair. Very subtle, right? In many ways, we've just got like this black hair, but then those little lines of like blue and purple just give it so much life. And then in terms of the face, like, wow, really exceptional. Very soft transitions, and so we go from, like, you know, maybe some of our darkest areas into the lighter areas, and it's seamless, right? This is using that technique that goes all the way back to Leonardo, what we call the sfumato, right? The sfumato is the invisible brushstrokes, right? And transitions that are very soft from light to dark, right? That Leonardo again mastered, you know, in his most famous painting, the Mona Lisa. And so you've got all that going for it in here. I mean, I don't know what else. The only thing I'm looking at is I see some kind of like these dark spots, which maybe that's just texture. I'm not sure what that is, but those are very, very minor, because yeah, in a way it does sort of look like, it kind of looks a little bit like maybe some acne or scars that have been covered up with makeup kind of coming through. And I think those would be pretty easy to get rid of. But that could just be the way that the photograph looks, or the way it was, you know. But I mean, I am just nitpicking because you wanted some feedback. I don't think, I would probably just be inclined to leave the painting alone, unless you wanted to do a little bit of touching up. But that would be pretty easy to do with just a little bit of glaze, like glazing fluid and some color. You paint it on there, and if it doesn't match, the great thing with glazing fluid, because it has slow dry properties, you can just wipe it off really quickly. You don't like it, just wipe it away. Mix it again, get a little bit more red or white in there. You'd probably want to blow dry, you know, or because if you wipe it off, you have probably a little bit of water. You want to wipe that off the surface, blow dry it, try it again. And you don't want to do it too many times, because every time you're wiping away, you run the risk of starting to wipe away colors underneath, and you could make a bigger problem for yourself. But anyway, really cool. Holly also posted a whole bunch of these swatches and color wheels from books and things. I included them here, but I don't think we're going to get into it. There's a vase of flowers, a photograph. She was painting that. I think essentially finished. I think that's really good. We do see a lot of the texture of the canvas coming through here, which is a total personal preference. As you may know, I don't like the texture of canvas. I like to gesso it again, even after if I've bought a canvas that comes pre-gessoed. I like to put gesso on it and sand it so it gets as smooth as possible. So much so that I often paint directly onto panels, like essentially plywood that's well sanded, so there's literally zero texture on there. That's my personal preference as an artist, but there's definitely artists who love the texture, who like seeing the weave of the canvas. I tend to always find that a little bit distracting, like, because we can see, like, when the light hits the canvas in a certain way, all of a sudden this area, which is intended to be just gray, starts picking up all that little bits of white. You know, or down here, often it looks even not just like reflections, but maybe even the white of the canvas showing through because of how thin the paint is as you're applying it. So that's just, I do feel like maybe even the values could be pumped up a little bit in here. Like, look how dark some of these shadows are underneath, like how dark that gets. But in your painting, there's like the level of values is like, so let's say you have a value scale. Here's your white, here's your black. In this painting, we've got some black right down here, but the rest of this painting is sort of existing in this narrow band of values, whereas we could certainly expand at least further down and maybe even a little bit of highlights more up here. If we look here, we could get some little even brighter areas that almost not approach white, but maybe a orange that has got a lot of yellow in it. Here's this statue in Ukraine, in Independence Square. Very cool. What's the difference between these two? I think they're this. Oh, I see. There's a lot more work done down, especially down here. Very cool. That is beautiful. I love that. That would be a fun one to do as well. Really cool. Thank you, Holly, for doing that. It's great. Nothing to say about it, but it's great. So Judy included this one here. Judy, an original design of South Mountain Preserve in Phoenix, Arizona. It's with 4 of its many trails. So that is awesome, Judy. You know, there's obviously there's some elements that remind me a lot of probably 2 of the American Southwest's most famous artists, Agnes Pelton, who we did one of her paintings a while ago too. I love her paintings. She's a little bit more on the abstract end of things. And then, of course, Georgia O'Keeffe, who did a lot of these kind of Southwest landscapes. But there is also elements of some of the surrealist painters who did these kind of landscapes devoid of people that often the way that surrealists did them, they're a little bit, what would you call it? Kind of not menacing, but mysterious. Like there's almost like a scene unfolding, and it's up to us as to be kind of like detectives to try to understand, to piece it together. Like, I think there's something, maybe it's because of the sky being kind of pretty dark above, and some of these grays just lend a sense of like mystery. I think that's the word I'm looking for, a mystery. There's a mysterious quality about this painting that like I feel like there's an invitation to walk into this landscape, to follow this path. I would also consider maybe not, I don't think you should do anything to the painting, but I do think that that pathway could be, as it approaches us, widen out even more to make it feel like we could really step right out into it. But it makes a sense like, okay, you can walk into this landscape, but there's some surprises in store. There's, who knows what's over top of this horizon, or top of that hill. Which I like. Again, I'm all saying all good things. All good things. All good things. Great work. Awesome job, Judy. And then Deborah here. This is my redemption after that first self-portrait. Or is this the same? So I think this is the first one. Is this a you fixed the vampire eyes? I'm not sure I see a difference. What's the... Is it just me, or they look... I mean, I see a little bit of a line here. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything different between them at all. And I'm not sure. So if there is a vampire eye that was fixed, I don't... Maybe we're talking about a different painting that I didn't manage to get into the video here, but I know it looks great. I also think the colors here are awesome. Very bold, daring choices of colors, right? From this cool red in the background, this bright blue outline that we also see in the face, in the shadows under her chin. That is very bold. It takes a lot of courage to paint like that. And so I'm very, very impressed, Maria. That is really cool. I think you should feel really proud of this painting. If this is one of your first self-portraits, wow. I would love to see where you are if you do a couple hundred of these, like Frida Kahlo or Rembrandt. Because I think you could, I mean, that's really exciting. Wow, okay, so here's Maria's version of the Marilyn Monroe painting that just sold for an exorbitant amount of money, and we're going to be doing this painting sometime in late September when we get to the #1 most expensive painting of all time. It's going to take us a while to get there because currently we're at number 35 or something. So I think is there 2 versions of this? I think, no, it looks like the same one. I thought there was something in here. Oh, okay, so this is the first, okay. And then Marie said I did a little bit of pointillism that should make Pascal happy. So I think I see that in the chin, just like a little dotted line here, which is also very Warhol, very Warholian. And that I think we talked about some of Warhol's earliest artwork, how he used he would draw with a pen that was sort of semi-defective, and it would leave these blots, and then he would turn the paper and peel them over, and what it would do was sort of create these blob and blotted lines, as he called them, and which would be very undesirable for most people, but Warhol loved it, and he made it his own, and it became part of his style. So it's one of those things that one person's mistake is another person's style. And for Warhol, it turned out to have made him a very successful illustrator years before he even became a painter. If Warhol had never made a single painting, he still would have become one of the most famous graphic artists of all time. He certainly was at that time before he took up painting, which, again, we've talked about, infuriated his contemporaries who didn't feel like he had paid his dues, because a real artist suffers in obscurity for decades and only then becomes popular. Warhol was a wealthy man that people saw as just a dilettante wandering into the art world. He doesn't belong here. You're supposed to work your way up and and live hand to mouth for a couple of decades at least before you're allowed to show your artwork in a good gallery. Oh, Rafi's doing the dragon boats too. My office team, we practice Thursday, and June 12th is our race day. Good luck, Ravi. Hope you win. Hope your office team wins. That would be awesome. A lot of people giving love to Heidi's squirrels there. Ravi says the aurora effect around the sun. That's what we were seeing there. Buddy is here on Kathy's behalf because she's on holiday, chiming in. That's cool. Deborah's see Holly. Michael says you can leave it alone. You have done an amazing job. We all think you should leave it alone. Lots of love. Is that the portrait, your self-portrait that we're talking about? Obviously, I haven't seen the comments on the chat on the Facebook group about that, but that's one of the things. If you haven't joined that Facebook group, I'm probably sure all of you watching right now are already a part of it, but I love how supportive you guys are of one another, because you're all going through it. You're all growing together, and that's so exciting. And some of you are further along that journey than others, and so you have that experience of knowing what it's like and how, you know, more so than even I do on what needs to be done, right? Because I'd like to think I can speak most clearly to that experience, but it's in truth, it was a long time ago that I was experiencing some of those things that you guys are dealing with. Anyway, sorry, Maria, great job with this painting. I think maybe her nose could be a little bit more bulbous, a little bit, but minor detail. I also do think that, yeah, this dotted line there is really smart, very clever concept here. Natalie, who hasn't been quite so active in the group lately, probably because they opened their own art supply store in Eastern Canada, and that is very exciting. Isn't that cool that one of our members of this group is so excited about painting they opened their own art supply store to help their own community? That's way to go, Natalie. That's awesome. And I love this big Bob Ross. I should have one right behind me here. That would be awesome. I wonder how much one of those things costs. I'm sure the Bob Ross Foundation sells them, which, by the way, if you haven't seen that great Netflix documentary, highly recommended, because don't want to spoil it for anybody, but the Bob Ross family doesn't really get any money, or very small amount of money, from the whole Bob Ross machine. But you got to find out, watch the documentary to find out who is profiting off of Bob Ross's legacy. That's a very, very interesting, very, very good documentary. Here's Osama. Osama is a student in he's been taking a bunch of my classes, my in-person classes, which recently restarted here in Vancouver, and has joined the group here. Awesome to see you, Osama. That's so cool. I love that there's some people that I've actually met in the real world that are part of the group now, right? That's really cool. So, let's move here to Pascal. And Pascal's been doing a bunch of self-portraits lately. So here's this kind of, you put them all together. It's very interesting, Pascal, like how you sort of go through all these different styles, and you're integrating those styles into your work, and we have like quite a diverse range of work that you've been producing. Some of it is very detailed, and some of it is just wildly, exuberantly expressionist. Right, so here's, I think you're painting a self-portrait in the style of Van Gogh. And I like seeing your stages of painting here. That's great. That's great. And then, so let me just see if I can offer anything here. Well, I mean, first of all, I think painting the self-portrait is there's a reason why it is so beloved and important for artists, because if you're willing to sit still for to be painted by yourself, then you have a subject that can occupy you for the rest of your life. And as I said, probably the two most famous self-portrait artists of all time, obviously the other things, are Rembrandt and Frida Kahlo. And both of them produced hundreds of self-portraits. Van Gogh himself, he did about almost 40 of them. But there's no better person to study than your own self, because you can, as I said, as long as you're willing to sit still, you can paint yourself. Whereas if you're trying to paint your husband or wife or children or grandparents or whatever, they might, if you can convince them to sit for you, that's a struggle in and of itself, but if you can convince them to sit for you, then there's that pressure, like, oh, they've been here for 20 minutes and they're already getting fidgety, right? And then, right, so it can be tricky, because there's a difference between painting from a photograph as opposed to painting from life. So, I would say, I mean, I really like the whole painting in and of itself is really cool. It's an interesting technique to cover this entire painting with this texture, because that could be a little bit problematic, having all of that texture underneath here where you're going to paint later on. But I would also say what you did earlier here with doing these kind of really just focusing on your face as opposed to the canvas and the palette, I think that would be probably something I would do even more of, because I think you have less to work on, less distractions, and you may even want to consider taking a photograph of yourself and then tracing that out. Like, so take that photograph, print it out on a photocopier, and then could be in color or black and white, and then use the carbon paper as we've been doing and transfer that onto a canvas. And then, because that way you have all of the proportions of your own face in roughly the right place, you'll realize how difficult it is to trace, and you might be like, wow, I'm so glad Michael does all these outlines, because it makes things so much easier, right? But if you have that outline, you're more likely to get sort of the eyes in, quote, the right place in relationship to the nose, and you'll then you can really focus more on just the colors and color mixing and everything, which I think you do a great job of. But I also, because obviously there is some distortions happening in the face, and I don't, again, just that distortion as a kind of a dirty word, I think distortion is a great thing. That's the history of art, is how artists use distortion to communicate their own point of view. But that might be just something to think about. There's this Bertha Morisot painting that you've done here. I love this. And I don't think this is the first. No, these are two different ones. This one's your first version. And then you started painting another one close up on the face. That turned out really cool. Really neat. I like how that turned out. Bertha Morisot is probably the most famous female Impressionist painter. And one of my favorite, obviously we did a painting of hers. We did a really cool flower years ago, and she has a very loose style of painting. So the way that you've painted in the background and everything, I think is very, very effective. To the point where, I mean, you have this little bit of an outline down here. I don't know if you need it. And if you want to do outlining, I would try to think of like a color. It's a similar thing we were talking about with signatures. You may want to think about that signature being, or this outlining color being a little bit more subtle. So rather than being sort of like your black, like what if it was a purple or an orange? Like think about what would be the darkest color in the shadow down here, or not even quite the darkest, like maybe even like this a blue like we have in here, and then a lighter color could be like an orange up here, so that outline modifies as it moves around the figure. I don't think you need it, but if you're thinking about doing the outline, that would be sort of the way I would approach it. We're gonna go through a few more here. I'm gonna start. We still have another 40 paintings or so to go through, so I want to. I like this here. Pascal has some extra paint on his palette at the end, so he just made a painting of it. This was very flattering. This is a painting of me. So Pascal made a painting of me while I was making a painting, and then said, "Oh, I think I need to do a little more outlining." Right? So here's, I don't know. It's up to you to decide. I don't mind this like this. I think the outline is nice. It does define me a little bit better, but I don't even know if you really need it. Again, with that outline, like when we use like one big solid black outline for everything, it pulls us into the comic book realm. And I'm drawing a comic book. I've been working on it for 6 years, so clearly I love comic books. I have nothing. I'm a huge fan of comics. I grew up reading comic books, so I'm not. When I say that, it's not a bad thing. And if that's what you're aspiring to do, by all means continue. But I would suggest the possibility of using different colors of outlines could be very satisfying. Like if we painted, instead of a black outline, like a blue or a green or an orange, I think that would even get you closer back, because I think you really like this very expressive, more abstract kind of approach. And this is sort of it. By putting that black, it kind of locks everything down. And I think if we have a bit more of a looser, more colorful outline, I think you'll be ultimately more happy. Wow, look at this Transformers figure. That's wild. That's great. I love those splatters. Like, it really conveys movement and action. Almost done here. This Pissarro. Ooh, that's nice. Huh. I like these. Those are wild. That's cool. I'd love to see even... So it's interesting, again, this tendency to allow for some things to just be really kind of ambiguous here. And then here you've kind of tightened it up with a little bit more outline. In this instance, I think it's actually working quite well, because the outlining is pretty subtle. There's maybe on this dress, you know... I'm going to write a note, because I want to do a focus. There's a group of artists kind of affiliated with the Impressionists the group is called Les Nabis, N-A-B-I-S, and Pierre Bonnard is the most famous of all those painters. But they almost took like the idea of the Impressionists and went even further into a loose abstraction. They're still painting people and landscapes, but they were very... There's no outlining. Everything's very ambiguous. I'm a huge... So yeah, let's do a Bonnard painting. It won't be for a while, but... Okay, so we've got a lot of Paula's work to go through here. So I apologize, Paula. We're not going to be able to spend too much time on everything here, but I do want to take a look at all the great work, because you've been so prolific and busy. Here's your Warhol, or Marilyn's Warhol. That's really nice. I like that a lot. Great use of colors. Her neck seems a little bit thin. Like if her neck came out a little bit further, I think that would work. But not bad. Also, her neck is a little bit different colors than the rest of her face. And that is something I notice a lot of the times, because people sometimes just get so wrapped up in painting the face, they forget about the neck, right? Or if there's some exposed kind of chest or shoulders, hands, knees, feet. Often what ends up happening is people spend all this time on the face and like, oh, I forgot to do... And then so then there's kind of a disjointed colors between faces and hands. So trying to kind of keep those things in, keep the rest of the body in mind while you're working on the face would be helpful. This parrot, that's cool. I like that. It looks like watercolor pencils. And here's this a new artist. Here's this Horskowski. if I was a horse teaching classes, I guess that's pretty funny. This is, I love that portrait. That is cool. I love that you're painted this in black and white, and so we have these very, very subtle hues here. These different, like, kind of slightly greenish grays and blacks. Really nice. Good job, Paula. These two. Not sure what this figure is here. Guy crouching, looking over. Is it a fire or something? I'm not sure. So that was a little bit undefined for me. I'm not sure what these guys are doing. Looking over the horizon at something. One of the things I think is great, Paula, is how you do paintings inspired by other people's paintings on the Facebook group, and you post them on there. And there's probably a bunch that I missed, because sometimes they're often buried in the comment sections of videos, but these are great. People posting suggestions, right? I think there's Greg did this character from Tintin, and Paula did a version of it. Here's, you remember, was it Heidi? Who did the duck? And there's like Heidi's version. Oh yeah, Heidi the duck. These are great. I'm sorry, there's just so many of these, Paula, and you've been so busy working on so many of them. A few of these, like, I've been painting for 10 hours today. Wow. You know, it's interesting. So a lot of these, there's one element I see, Paula, is like the speed that many of these are done at, which is very, you know, impressive that you're able to work so quickly and to get something done so quickly. The one thing I would suggest is, what if, so here's what inspired this painting, is perhaps approaching some paintings in a much slower way, and not worrying about getting them done so quickly, but trying to do them even slower, or doing them faster, and saying to yourself, let's say a painting like this, if I gave myself a 10-minute limit and said, I'm going to make this painting in 10 minutes, what would you do? What color? Or you could limit yourself again, say, I'm going to use 2 colors for this entire painting. I'm not going to use the full palette as we've been doing. You could even just put your colors in a box and pull out, oh, I got a red, I got a warm red, and oh, I got a cool red. How am I going to do this painting with just 2 reds? Whoa, that would be crazy. Like trying to create a painting with such a limited palette. That's an extreme example, but I think that kind of thing would be a really fun exercise for you to try to do, is to try to either go much slower and to really focus on developing some more contrasts and detail, or to try to go even faster. Or another way to think about that would be to, let's say, some of the great Chinese artists and Japanese artists who might, who do a painting, maybe something like this, but they do it, they might paint very slowly. It might take them 2 hours, but there might only be 10 brush strokes on there, because every brush stroke is put like very carefully, so that you might think of like, you know, they might sit there and go, okay, I'm going to do the ear of that cat, but I'm going to use one brush stroke for it. And I might even practice on 5 pieces of paper just doing an ear. Okay, let's do another. Let's try it again. And then, okay, on this here, let's do that ear, 1 brush stroke. And that's it. Right? So it's like kind of the blending between fast and slow, and that you're going to spend 2 hours on this painting, but you're only going to use 10 brush strokes. What? So maybe you're doing a bunch of practicing on another piece of paper. So I think, because I feel like you've got a kind of routine going that is working really well for you, but I'm starting to feel like we need to challenge you to find a different avenue for you to grow even further. And that might be, so it's like, how can we add a little twist to your process that would challenge you in a way, and it may not result in results that you're happy with, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to throw that stuff away and go back to what I'm doing. But there might be just a couple little things that you pick up on there that I think would be helpful. This is really nice. I like these figures. That's great. The other thing too, I'm not sure if you took the drawing course that I did here on YouTube. That might be worth just going and revisiting some of that, because I think some of that drawing exercise, even though you've done a masterful job of drawing everything, I think that might be helpful for you as well in a few places. Here's this eagle, which you repainted here. I love that. That is wild. I think that's cool. This makes me feel like that would look really cool as like a mask, right? Like, I could see that being sculpted out of wood or plaster or something. That's wild. Really cool. Okay, and then we'll move on. I think we don't have that many more to look at here. So this is a painting, a self-portrait by Peter, who was one of my in-person students 4 or 5 years ago, and was very involved for a while, and has sort of come back and starting to post a little bit more again. It's really neat that he did this. He says he uses this as his Zoom prop. So when he's in an online meeting or class, he can just kind of put this in front of the camera, and it looks like he's still there. Very, very funny. I like this a lot, Peter. I like that, you know, you're doing a few different interesting things with lines and outlining, as we've talked about. Like, so for instance, your choice to outline your nose and lips and chin, but not your eyelids, I think is very fascinating. Or not even to do your pupil in the center of your eyes. I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying you should, because I think they're interesting stylistic conventions as to like what is outlined, what's not outlined. Some people will outline everything, and you know, like Hergé, who did Tintin, outlined everything, and that's great. But there's can be playing with that a little bit, as you've done here, I think is really interesting. So there's some really cool, like even like your bow tie, which you famously wear all the time, or at least every time I've seen you. You didn't outline the whole thing, but you did do some of the little folds in there, right? Like you left this, for instance, where we have the bow tie. Obviously these are 2 different parts of the tie overlapping, but I think many people would have drawn that line in, and you didn't. And in many ways that's very generous to us as a viewer. You give us, you're acknowledging our intelligence to figure out, oh yeah, I understand that this bow tie is a complex thing and there's lots of folds in there. So you're just saying like, okay, I'm just gonna leave it like that. So I like that kind of stuff. I think that's great. let's look at Ravi's here. Ravi's started this series. We looked at it maybe a couple of episodes ago, of these small paintings that exist outside in their backyard, on the fence and on the house and even on the window, as we'll see here. I think are very fun and very funny as well, and must make for like a very kind of playful home for you and your family. I think that's great. That's a little speed limit sign in the backyard, and I wonder, these must be pretty small. Like, that's got to be what, pretty, like, no, probably what the size of this post-it note tablet, right? So it looks like maybe they're just like little scraps of wood that you're painting on. Very fun. But just in case anybody thought that that's all you were capable of doing, look at this cool painting of the Taj Mahal. I think my friend asked me to make a painting of the Taj Mahal under moonlight, no less. Wow. Very cool. I love all of this line work. That's got to be a Posca pen of some kind. Man, this line work reminds me of... Is it Saul? He used to illustrate for the New Yorker. I think his name is Saul Steinberg. I think is his name. Did something very. His style is very similar to this, especially in the way that he drew bricks and stuff. And he's a big. I really love his work. So I always try to compare to artists that I really like, because it's. I want to make sure that you know that I'm trying to. I'm not. I want to encourage what I see in these works, and trying to give people references to other people that may have come before, that have already laid some groundwork that you can walk on. Here's Algonquin Park here. Interesting. I feel like this feels like there still could be a lot more work done on here. This feels like this would be the first pass or first stage of a painting. I feel like we need to see more going on in here, because clearly from some of the other the artwork we were just looking at, you're capable of doing a lot more refinement in here. Same sort of thing here. And when we talked about earlier, I can't remember whose painting it was, like the Bay of Fundy. We have a lot of this empty space in the foreground, and even in the sky. Something should be there for us to look at it. You know, it's all. And another example would be two things I can think of. Like, one would be, let's say, food. If you go to a restaurant and you have half of the plate is garnish, not even a salad you could eat, but if they, sometimes you've been to a sushi restaurant and they put like a big thing of lettuce and you know, some shaved radishes on there, and then just like a couple little pieces of fish. You're like, I feel like you've got this big plate, and really there's only a few things I can eat on there. This is trying to make me feel better about how little food I'm getting here. Or like a movie, we've probably all seen a movie where there's like a long shot of nothing, or just like a cloud passing in the sky, and you're watching it for 5 seconds, you're like, that's a really beautiful cloud, and then you're watching it for another 10 seconds, you're like, this is going to be a slow movie, isn't it? And then a minute goes by and we're still looking at you're like, okay, I don't know about this, I don't know if I have, right? So those are the kind of things I think about sometimes when we have big empty spaces in paintings. I'm like, why is this here? I feel like there should be something going on in here for you to put that there. So I'm saying, like, obviously, Ravi, you've been able to do incredible things we've seen previous to this. So I want to challenge you to think about how we can use composition to kind of add something there. Okay. Let's continue on here. I think this is the inspiration. Sandra said, it's a long story. I've asked my husband if I could paint him something that he would want. And he wanted something from Dragon Ball Z, the kind of cartoon and game, etc. So this is what resulted. I think that's amazing. This is a new version, I think. I'm going to add a cloud in here. I don't know. I kind of like it like that, Sandra. I don't know if I would do anything more to it. I think that's pretty cool. And I don't know if I can add anything. I really like the gradients you've put in here, how it gets a little bit darker down here. So I think you should just leave it. It's kind of a neat composition on its own. Obviously, you've taken a little bit of a different angle on this picture. This one, we're looking at, let's say, this shape from kind of above here, right? Because you can see the whole kind of the top edge of this semicircle, semisphere, versus here we're seeing it from almost that angle, maybe a little bit of the top surface like that. So in that instance, all of these, the lines and everything are straight horizontal, whereas here we can see we've got these lines are kind of curving around here a little bit more. So I think what you've done here works really well within the logic of your painting, and I think you should just leave it. Let's see, you've got these swatches that you were working on for an abstract paint. I don't think I saw the next development of this, so I'm interested to see where that goes. I love seeing all of these paints. You know, lots of different blues you've got here. And one thing that makes me really happy is that you've labeled your materials. We've got warm, cool, warm, warm, warm. I think everyone should do that if you haven't already, because it helps make it really easy for when you're looking for paints, because you don't have to use the same 6 colors that I use, right? You could use any 6 colors. Ideally, you would probably use 2 yellows, 2 blues, and 2 reds. But what those yellows are and what those reds are, what those blues are, can be very different. And some people might say, well, you know what? I don't need those very saturated colors. I want to start with a palette that's much more muted. And so you could do that. But I would still say that you would want to pick a cool blue and a cool blue and a warm blue, cool red and a warm red, right? Cool yellow and a warm yellow, as opposed to 2 cool yellows, 2 cool blue, etc. Because then you're going to have a very skewed palette. It would be an interesting exercise for sure, but I think you might find that, especially if you've got multiple cool yellows or cool blues, for instance, it's sort of like there's no point in having them, right? It's almost like another food analogy. It's like using 3 different kinds of salt, right? Oh, you're going to use some sea salt and some pink sea salt and some regular table salt, and I'm going to put them like, it's like okay, I can't really taste the difference when you got them all together. Versus if you use just one, then you might be able to taste that unique quality. Donna says, I've seen the Bob Ross documentary. It pissed me off. Michael has taken the Bob Ross spot in my heart, but I still love Bob. That's so sweet. I appreciate that. It's very... Yeah, it is a little bit... the ending of that movie is a little bit of a bummer, for sure. It's worth seeing. It's just... doesn't quite have the happy ending I think we would all like to know, especially, you know, what kind of the fact that that is it his brother is living in a trailer park, like on food stamps, and you're like, Bob Ross is like making the Bob Ross trademark is making hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It doesn't seem quite fair to me. I don't think that's what Bob Ross would have wanted either, right? Okay, almost done here. There was a question Sandra had in the chat of, if you were to pick 6 of these colors for a palette, which ones would they be? And so I think it might be just instructive for some people to see how I would make that decision. So when if I'm selecting 6 different colors, I'm trying to figure out what are my 2 yellows, what are my 2 reds, what are my 2 blues. I'm generally trying to find the 2 that are furthest away from one another, right? So that way, because I can always mix a pretty close approximation of the colors that exist between them by just mixing my 2 different yellows together, right? So I would probably pick one of these yellows. Obviously, I'd probably take, my warm yellow would probably be this one. This yellow, the Indian yellow as they call it here, is maybe a little bit too orange. I can make that with my warm red and my warm yellow. So I'd probably go for this as my warm. My cool yellow, Hansa yellow is like really, really cool. I think in our class we usually use this cadmium yellow light, which is a little bit less cool, but Hansa would work fine. You could see there's the difference between these is minimal, as I have in my palette as well. But I think any of these 3, and it's hard to say just from these little swatches what these are. Like Hansa yellow is a artificial color that was kind of invented in the 60s, and it is super saturated. So it's sometimes nice to have that type of color available to you, because you can get like really, really intense, saturated, bright colors. So, you know, again, I would say this, if you're keeping track of these numbers, be probably 102, 107. I don't think you could go wrong with any of these 3 just based on what I'm seeing. In terms of your warm colors, warm red, probably the cadmium red light, 145, to your cold red would probably be, I'd probably go for this number 147, the quinacridone magenta. And then my blue would be, my ultramarine blue, I think is a great standard as your warm blue. And then your cerulean blue, number 127. Because if you go even further, then you're going really far into the greens. Really way too, basically you're not even in a blue anymore, you're in a blue-green. So that, I think you could mix from there all these other colors, obviously except for like silver and gold, because they have these metallic qualities to them. So let me just see, what did so I think Sandra suggested the bismuth yellow and Arlide yellow for the warm. I don't think those are quite far enough apart. I would go even further over here. Cobalt blue for your cold, I don't think that's I would go cerulean is even colder, because we can make a cobalt blue by mixing ultramarine blue and cerulean together. Quinacridone magenta, which is I think what I said, right, for your cold red, and pyrrole red for white, or for the warm. Again, I would go even a little bit warmer, because that's still kind of on the cold side. So you see how I'm trying to find what is furthest away from one another, because if you get too close, then those colors are just going to be, when you try to mix that palette, everything's going to look kind of the same. You're going to be like, I don't really see any difference. Like, so if I just real quick here, if I choose these 2 colors are so similar, when you start mixing these things, you're going to be like, there's really no difference between this orange and this orange. They look exactly the same. Or this purple is going to look the same as this purple, and this green is going to look the same as this green. So in that sense, if you're going to have the colors are so similar, then it sort of defeats the purpose of using a split primary palette, which is what we've been using. And you might as well just use one color for a yellow, one red, and one blue, which can, obviously there's many people that have done that and it'll work, but you're going to find that some colors you're just not getting the saturation you want. And if you want to make, let's say, a bit more of a especially if you've got more of these saturated colors, to make these colors that are closer to the interior, you're going to have to use, let's say, a third color in your mixture as opposed to just two colors to get there. Or vice versa, if let's say you're using one that's warmer like this, you're not going to be able to get these more saturated colors. So it's, I think you want more. I think you want the farther the two blues are from one another, the more options you'll have going forward. Okay, so a few more here. Here's a painting that Charmaine did of her friend's father, and took a few different photos. One, I think this is in daylight, and this is in night, or probably with the incandescent light bulbs in her house, right? And gets a very different kind of light, color temperature, I mean, in terms of the light. I think she says she prefers this lighting of the painting. It's interesting how much lighting can influence how painting looks as well, right? It's kind of interesting. This basically has like a sepia quality. It makes it look kind of like an old-timey photo, whereas this just looks kind of more like a traditional black and white photograph. I think all of them, I mean, either way, it's fine. In terms of the portrait, I think everything looks great. I think you've done an excellent job here. Even the hair specifically. I think if anything, we could probably define a little bit more of the collar of his suit here a bit more. Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, I was going to say his nose, there's something a little bit skewed about his nose. Very minor detail. I think it looks great. I think you did a fantastic job here, Charmaine. Here's a painting that Shelley did. This is a photograph of Shelley. This is her next door neighbor's beautiful little girl. And I couldn't help but wanting to make a picture. So this is the first step here. And then this is the finished version, I think. What was the difference? Oh, I wanted more darkness underneath the chin. I don't know if I see any difference there. Very subtle. I'm not sure I see the difference. Oh, I guess a little bit right there. Minor. I think it looks fine. What's interesting is the way that these brush strokes are all done. Is it does remind, you know, we have a daughter who's now almost 3, but there is, like, you know, the way that the little babies seem to have this little hair that covers their whole face. There's something about that I kind of feel I see in here. With this kind of, I don't, maybe it's glazing, or but that could also be done with even more layers of thin paint to just get a bit smoother gradients in there, so it's not quite so we don't see the brush strokes as much. Like I always think, if you can see the brush strokes, then we should really see them. Right, so that it becomes like the Impressionists. It's clear. It's no mistaking that it's done 100% deliberately. And if you see them but you don't like them, then you should really work really hard to get rid of them. right? And to make it as smooth as possible, so that either way that it looks like you're meaning to do it deliberately, and it's not because of we're in a hurry or there's some technical skill that you need to work on. So that's just something for all of you to think about. Like when you're making your paintings, you might really want it to be really smooth, but you find that really hard, or you don't have to paint. You're like, oh, it's going to take me forever. And so if that's the case, really go the opposite direction and really investigate what that is. And then if you go for, you're like, you know what, I don't like this real brushy stuff. Then you're like, okay, well, now I know if I don't want to do that, then I'm really going to have to focus on developing that smooth sfumato technique that Leonardo popularized. But again, I love the instinct to want to paint pictures of friends and family, neighbors and stuff. Great. This is awesome, Sharon. This is painting illuminated by outdoor light. I'm not sure what... I guess it means like the light coming... Oh, is this light coming in from behind the canvas, potentially? Is that out? It's like a canvas on a stretcher frame and the light coming in from behind. Is that what you mean? Or is this... because anyway, I love this kind of the pink. It does appear to be glowing, which would happen if there was light coming from inside the painting as opposed to reflecting off of the painting. But we could do, if that's how this was done, because there's light coming through, it's not too hard to do to make this painting exactly as it is here, but let's say on a piece of plywood or whatever, right? Really, to get that effect, we would probably want it, you could do your imprimatura with that magenta, like we did with the Yoshitomo Nara painting of that little girl, right? If we painted this with that like fluorescent pink, it would appear to be kind of glowing in that pink color. Okay. And we got some drawings by Shelley. I think we got 10 things left to look at here. So we're almost at the very, very end of today's episode. So it might be just worth just a quick reminder to everyone that if you're enjoying this, you found it interesting, useful, if I've helped you in any small way, consider leaving a donation. There's the PayPal link in the description below. There's a super chat function. You can donate directly through YouTube. Or there's also, you can contact me through the Facebook group and send a check or all that kind of stuff. And of course, liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell so you know when these episodes are coming. All that stuff is really, really helpful. So thank you to all of those of you who've been continuing to support the channel with small donations, some who have been very generous, as well as those of you that are liking, subscribing, sharing, and inviting other friends to participate in the group. That's all fantastic. So we have some great, excellent drawings here by Shelley, and who again just did this awesome portrait here, but of some dogs and cats, and these are amazing illustrations. I love these. Beautiful job, Shelley. I don't know what to say about some of these except they're really great. Beautiful. Wow. You're doing a really exceptional job of getting that sense of like the fur, like even this, anyone who's knows this type of a dog, like there's a shininess to that dog's fur that you kind of captured here. That's funny. And you did all these drawings and donated them and helped your local animal rescue raise $550. That is awesome. That is, again, like such an admirable thing to do. I mean, like yourself, obviously believe in taking care of our little animal friends and being a good steward of the environment. And so people who are supporting, their local animal shelters is something that is close to my own heart. That is awesome. often animals are, you know, some of the most vulnerable members of our community, because sometimes people just callously, you know, leave them on the side of the highway and all that kind of stuff. And so those organizations do incredible work. That is beautiful. I love these. I'm actually surprised that more people didn't step up to spend more money on these, because I think they were certainly worth it. Oh, these are great. I love the attention to detail. Like here, the way the the fur kind of comes to a point there underneath on the belly and chest. Really nice. That really shows like careful observation. Donna says, my message in Messenger, I really need an answer. When did you I haven't said, I read that yet. So, and here's a landscape by Shelley. I think it's the same thing. I feel like there's a lot of this dark area down here. I kind of wish there was something, like why are you bringing our attention to this area? What, is there something that needs to be there? I also think if we add a little bit of gray into here, it'll push that further backwards and give a little bit more depth into this painting. Here's a drawing by Vanya. That is awesome. I love the contours around the legs and the arms. That's super effective. And then these paintings here by Susan to end us off for the evening. Really wonderful, Susan. Really beautiful flowers. This is a great example of the background. Here our brush strokes are actually fairly distinct, but because they're all kind of a little bit more muted, more pastel colors, they recede into the background, and they sort of look like bokeh on a camera, right? They're like that soft, slightly out of focus detail that's there, but we can't quite figure out what it is. And then here, this is a marvelous painting of flowers. I really like this. It has like a bit of an Alexander Colville or Alex Katz quality here. So no, this is our last drawing here.
Well, that's good timing when she comes downstairs too.
Okay. What do you think of this one, Edie? This is our last artwork for today. Wow, look at all these exceptional artists who are part of this group here. Wow, awesomeness. So, what do you think about this? Look at that flower. Would you like Daddy to make a painting of a flower like that? That would be cool, wouldn't it? Susan says, this painting took me some time to complete. It's getting the colors close to the photo was more difficult than I thought. So it's very interesting here, the difference between this one and this one, how we've got this very soft background here. And here she's painted with a lot more sharper lines, almost like puzzle pieces. So kind of two very different approaches to painting flowers. And it's really exciting to see them there together. So, thank you everyone for joining us and for taking a look at the artwork today. Oops. We need to run. Oops. So we'll see you guys on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we're going to be painting Barnett Newman and then Picasso on Thursday. We'll see you guys all in a few days. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, wherever you are on our beautiful planet. And thanks again for all your support. I'm so blown away by all the incredible artwork that you guys have done. I know there's a few of you who really want me to take a look at your artwork, but I gotta run. My wife's about to leave for the evening, so if I don't, it could be chaos in here. So we'll do another one of these episodes in a couple of weeks and catch up on all the stuff we missed. And we'll see you guys then. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys very, very soon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Good night, everybody. Good night.